What if the sword never falls? What if, in the single strangled heartbeat between breath and steel, something colder than Joffrey's whim reaches the great sept of Baelor and closes a hand around fate's wrist? The air inside the sept is thick, unmoving, heavy with summer heat and the sour sweet mix of dust and incense. Hundreds of bodies are pressed shoulder to shoulder, a living wall of wool and leather and sweat, their whispers rising and breaking like a distant sea against marble and gold. Ned Stark kneels on the rough stone, wrists bound, the way a man kneels not for spectacle but for a final understanding with himself. The light from the high windows falls in hard white shafts, and in one of those shafts the great sword glitters, poised above the back of his neck. He feels the stone through his knees, feels the weight of the hood, feels the nearness of darkness like winter coming down a mountain pass. He does not see Arya lost somewhere in the crowd. He does not see Sansa shaking in her pretty southern silks. He sees only the choice he has already made, the lie he has already spoken, the way important words can be bent for the sake of daughters and still cut like honest steel when they leave a man's mouth. Around him the city holds its breath. Men lean forward, eager, eyes bright with that particular fire that comes when death is promised and it is not their own. They have come for a show, for the fall of a great name, for a story they will carry back to their alleys and wine sinks. They do not think of cost. Why would they? The room is large, the moment small, and the future is a shadow they have never learned to fear. Far away, in blackened Harrenhal, another man has already weighed this same life and found a different use for it. Tywin Lannister speaks of honour only when it serves him, but he understands the value of a breathing hostage, the leverage of a lord kept alive under guard, rather than displayed as a head on a spike. The way a man like Tywin looks at the board, Ned Stark's death is waste, not justice. The most merciful act he will ever command is not born of mercy at all, but of cold arithmetic. So what if his will moves faster than we remember? What if the Raven leaves Harrenhal at once? The ink on the order still drying with the particular care of a man placing something fragile on a table, and the black wings beat south through night and heat and storm until at last they reach the Red Keep. In that case, this moment in the sept is no longer fixed. A living Ned means a different Robb, no young wolf forged entirely in grief, no war in the Riverlands shaped only by vengeance. It means a North that must decide between crown and father, between winter's old oaths and a new uncertain peace. It means Sansa as something more than a trapped child, Arya's path bent before it hardens into exile and faceless masks. No one in the sept feels that future yet, but it is there, like a pressure in the air before a storm. On the steps, the headsman shifts his grip. The sword begins to move, a slow, bright arc, and the crowd exhales as one, the sound like a great beast loosing its breath. And then, cutting through incense and heat and the first whisper of steel, comes a shout from the doors, a royal herald's voice, cracking as it forces the moment to fracture. The herald's voice hangs in the hot air of the sept, but the story has already slipped its track days earlier, far from incense and stone, in a colder, quieter room. Harrenhal breathes around Tywin Lannister like a wounded beast. The great ruined walls drink in torchlight, and in the Lord's campaign tent, the air smells of wax and steel and damp canvas. Maps lie spread before him, rivers and roads marked in a precise Lannister hand, small wooden lions and wolves placed with the particular care of a man placing something fragile on a table. He is alone when the rider comes. Mud to the knees, cheeks wind-burned, the man bows too quickly, the way a man does when he brings both urgency and the risk of displeasure. The words come in a rush. Eddard Stark has confessed. The boy king means to take his head. The thing is to be done in the great sept before the whole city. Tywin does not answer at once. He lets the tent's quiet return. The candle flames a soft, steady fire at the edges of his vision. He hears not the drama of it, but the cost. Joffrey's voice, shrill in memory, Cersei's, too smooth by half. He has warned them both about the way important words spoken in public cannot be unsaid. In his understanding of war, men are pieces, names are levers, and hostages are the iron that keeps a realm from slipping into darkness. Ned Stark is not simply a traitor, he is Winterfell, the North, the father of the girl already in their hands, and of the boy now calling banners in the Riverlands. To burn such a man for spectacle is to throw away a fortress for the pleasure of watching it fall. He thinks of Joffrey, a child who mistakes fear for power. He thinks of Cersei, who lets the child play at king with real pieces because she cannot bear being the one to say no. He does not waste contempt on them. Contempt is a luxury. He calculates, what if the head falls? What if the North, unmoored from its lord, decides it will never again bend the knee to Lannister gold? Slowly he sits, pulls parchment toward him. The quill scratches, each word chosen like a move on the board. He speaks of stability. He speaks of the need to honour the public confession, to send the Stark Lord to the wall or hold him as a living pledge, not a martyr. He does not threaten Joffrey by name. He does not need to. The raven to the small council carries a different kind of edge, a reminder that the gold that feeds the city and the armies that keep it whole answer, in the end, to him. Ned Stark is to live. That is the command. Not for mercy. Tywin does not believe in mercy. For advantage, for leverage, for the long winter of politics that comes after any battle. And in that single quiet choice, made over maps and candles instead of blood and song, the story we know loosens, the shadow of another future beginning to take shape beyond the walls of Harrenhal. The great sept holds its breath. Ned's confession still seems to hang in the air, the way important words sometimes linger after the mouth has closed, as if unwilling to accept the silence that follows. The crowd's roar has fallen away into a thick, uneasy hush. Sansa feels it as a pressure in her ears, in her chest, a quiet that hurts. She is trembling, hands clenched so tightly in front of her that her knuckles have gone white, staring at her father's bowed head and the sword rising behind him like a slow, inevitable piece of winter. Arya, pressed into the shadow of a pillar, sees it from a different angle. The headsman's boots, the glint of steel, the line of Ned's neck. She's small in the crush, half hidden by the stone and the forest of bodies, but her eyes are very wide. She does not breathe. She does not blink. Somewhere far away, a bell tolls, and the sound seems to mark not the hour but the cost. The sword begins to fall. It is then that the pattern breaks. A man in Lannister crimson forces his way through a knot of gold cloaks and white cloaks, the movement jarring in the stage stillness of the spectacle. His tabard is dust-streaked from hard riding, his face flushed, sweat darkening his hair. He shouts before he is close enough to kneel, the way a man will when the weight of his message is heavier than courtesy. His voice cracks against the dome of the sept. "A raven from Lord Tywin," he cries, and the word raven carries, sharp as the edge of a blade. By command of the hand of the king, Eddard Stark is not to die. He is to be spared, for the good of the realm. The headsman freezes mid-swing. Steel halts in the air like a held breath. The crowd ripples, sound returning all at once. Gasps, curses, the low, frightened murmur of hundreds of throats trying to understand how darkness can be called back once invited. Somewhere, Sansa makes a small, broken sound that might be a prayer, or only his name. On the dais, faces change in quick succession. Cersei's expression goes very still. The stillness of a woman counting costs she had not expected to pay today. For a heartbeat, there is naked fury there. Then calculation settles over it like a veil. Varys tilts his head. The movement slight, his eyes reflecting candlelight and something unreadable, as if he is already measuring new lines on a board no one else can see. Littlefinger's mouth curves, just enough to be noticed by anyone looking for such things. Amusement and opportunity mingled in the shadow of that slight smile. Joffrey flushes. It rises from his collar like heat from a fire, spreading up his neck into his cheeks. To be contradicted is one thing. To be contradicted here, before the city, before the realm, by a grandfather who is not even in the room, is another. He does not yet have words for the insult, but his body knows it. His hands clench on the arms of the throne, knuckles pale, jaw tight. What is a king, if another man's raven can unmake his sentence? The silence that follows is different from the earlier hush. This one is edged, waiting. The way important words now will decide not only one man's life, but the shape of every hall and hearth that remembers this day. The sword still hangs, a line of light above Ned's neck. The headsman's arms tremble with the strain of holding it there. Joffrey looks to his mother. Cersei does not move, though something sharp flickers in her eyes. He looks to the Kingsguard, to the faces turned up toward him, to the distant doors through which, in his imagination, his grandfather's shadow seems already to be entering. He is torn between the hot, childish rage that wants to scream defiance, and the colder, newer understanding that there are other kinds of power in this world, and that Tywin Lannister embodies one of them. He does not speak at once. The delay stretches, a thin, painful thread. Sansa feels each heartbeat as a blow. Arya's fingers curl around the stone at her back until they ache. Even Varys seems to lean, almost imperceptibly, toward the answer. When Joffrey finally rises, the movement is abrupt, too quick, as if he is afraid that if he waits another heartbeat, the choice will be taken from him entirely. His voice, when it comes, is high and brittle. Lord Stark has confessed his treason, he says. He speaks of mercy as if the word tastes sour. For my grandfather's sake and for the realm, I will not take his head today. Instead, he will take the black. He will live out his days on the wall in disgrace. There is a rustle through the sept, a complicated sound that is not quite approval and not quite disappointment. Cersei exhales, the smallest release of breath, fury and relief braided so tightly together that they are indistinguishable. She arranges her face with the particular care of a man placing something fragile on a table, each line smoothed into a mask that says this was always the plan. Sansa's legs give way. She sinks to her knees where she stands, sobs breaking out of her in great shaking waves. Gratitude floods her, bright and blinding. But even as it does, a thin crack of fear runs through it. The promise feels fragile, like ice at the edge of spring. How long can such a mercy survive in a court built on shifting shadows and sharper steel? Above her, Ned Stark lifts his head, as if the command has reached him through water. He does not yet understand the full cost of being spared. He only knows that the sword has not fallen. Not yet. And somewhere, far from the sept, a raven cage stands open. Tywin Lannister's words already loosed upon a realm that has no understanding of how completely they are about to change its winter. What if the coldest man in Westeros commits, in the quiet of a ruined castle, the most merciful act of his life? What if the raven is only the beginning, and the true choice is made in the silence that follows? Harrenhal is never truly still, but it feels that way when Tywin leaves the war room. The great stone corridors drink sound the way a man dying of thirst drinks water. Even the clatter from the forges comes thin and distant, a muted ring beneath layers of old ash and older fear. He walks alone to a smaller chamber, a bare room with a single chair, a table, a narrow slit of a window that lets in more shadow than light. His armour waits for him there, set upon the chair with the particular care of a man placing something fragile on a table. Gold and steel, lion heads and red enamel, all of it gleaming faintly in the low fire. He does not sit. He stands looking at it instead, at the hollow shape of himself, and listens to the quiet beat of his own breath. Outside, men hammer iron into weapons. Inside, he hammers a different metal, names, oaths, futures. He remembers another room, another fire, another king. The way Aerys's hands had twitched when he spoke of burning cities. The way important words had been turned to cinders in that mad mouth. One command, and years of Tywin's careful work had gone up in smoke. Alliances scorched. Respect curdled to fear. the realm taught to flinch at the sound of a Targaryen voice. He had watched a dynasty eat itself from the inside, not because its enemies were strong, but because its king could not master his own impulses. He will not watch that story repeat itself in Lannister crimson. Ned Stark, to him, is not a man in chains beneath the sept. He is a piece on the board, heavy and stubborn and useful. Alive, Ned is a northern conscience pinned beneath Lannister fingers, a way to keep the wolf pack from running entirely free. A living father holds a son's honour in check. A breathing lord of Winterfell can be bartered, threatened, paraded as proof that the lions know the difference between necessity and cruelty. A dead Ned Stark is only a martyr, and martyrs have a way of setting the whole winter country on fire. He thinks of Cersei, all sharp pride and short horizons, mistaking fear for power. He thinks of Haim, the best sword in the room and the worst at seeing past tomorrow. If he does not reach from Harrenhal and close his hand around the capital, what will their golden dynasty be built on? Sand and songs and the laughter of a boy king who believes a crown excuses the cost of every whim. The raven is gone. The order is given. Joffrey will be made to understand, or be made irrelevant. In the hush between decisions, another thought stirs, unwelcome as smoke in a closed chamber. Does it matter why a life is spared? If it is spared? If a monstrous man stays his hand, not from pity but from calculation? Is the breathing that follows any less real? He does not linger with the question. He turns from the armour, from the fire, from the thin slice of pale sky, and steps back into the corridor's waiting darkness, already considering how best to spend the quiet, inconvenient mercy he has just purchased with a few lines of ink and a lion's seal. They take him back the way a man is taken from a grave he has not quite finished lying in. The corridor is the same, the torches spit the same thin, uncertain fire. Yet every stone seems altered by the knowledge that his head should already be lying on some blood-slick step of the great sept. His knees buckle once on the stair, a white flare of pain running up his thighs, and the gold cloak behind him shoves, impatient, as if the body he is guarding were only an inconvenience, and not a life that has refused to end. The cell receives him with its usual indifference. The door shuts. The darkness folds close. Ned sinks down with the particular care of a man placing something fragile on a table, only that something is his own weight, his own treacherous bones, and they protest. His knees ache from the forced kneeling, the stone having bitten deep through cloth and flesh. There is dust in his mouth, grit from the yard and the scaffold, and when he swallows he tastes the sept again, the crowd, the hot press of eyes. He can still feel the blade, not its steel, but its intention. A cold, precise line at the nape of his neck that never quite touched skin, and yet has marked him more surely than any scar. He hears his own voice as it sounded there, hoarse and thin, speaking treason that was not treason, speaking of Joffrey's right with the full weight Ned gives to words, and knowing each one was a lie. Honour has always been a straight road in his understanding. You tell the truth. You keep your oaths. You pay the cost yourself. Now the road bends. He has called himself traitor to save his daughters and lived. What is a Stark who survives by saying he is no Stark at all? He does not have an easy answer, only the memory of Sansa's white, frightened face, and the knowledge that Arya was somewhere in that sea of people, unseen, perhaps already turning away. The jailer comes later, or it may be Varys. In the dark, footsteps and rustle are the same at first. A lantern enters the room before the man does, throwing long shadow against rough stone. The words are simple. The king has been persuaded. The sentence is commuted. Eddard Stark is to take the black, to go to the wall, to live out his days where winter never quite loosens its grip. Ned listens. Acceptance settles first. Duty is a familiar cloak, even when it is made of crow feathers and ice. Then quiet dread, slow and deep, at the thought of never again feeling the wind on the hills above Winterfell, never hearing the godswood stream. What if he dies with the heart tree of another wood above him, and not his own? Yet beneath that, like a coal under ash, there is a small, stubborn gratitude. Breathing has been granted a little longer. He thinks of Robb and Catelyn as they must be now in the north, or on the road, or in some hall lit by another fire. He sees Robb's face when the raven comes, bearing the tale of his father's treason and supposed execution. The way important words will fall like axes in that quiet room. Dead. Traitor. War. He imagines Catelyn's hands closing on the parchment, her understanding of southern cruelty hardening into something sharp. He does not know that his continued heartbeat will turn their choices, only that he has wounded them with his survival hidden behind a lie. After the man and the lantern are gone, the cell is very still. Ned lowers one hand to the floor and lets his fingers rest against the cold stone, as if by touching it he can touch the bones of the whole city, the whole realm. One by one, he whispers the names of his children into the darkness, each word a promise, each name a tether. Robb, Sansa, Arya, Bran, Rickon, Jon. He speaks of them as if calling them back from some edge. Or perhaps he is calling himself back, anchoring what remains of Eddard Stark to the simple fact of their existence. Whatever exile waits at the end of this narrow escape, he will walk into it for them. The wall is far. The ravens are already flying. The ravens are already flying. And Sansa Stark walks back through the Red Keep as if she is one of them, light and hollow-boned, carried more by shock than by her own feet. The corridors swim around her. The torches are only smears of fire on stone, the guards only shapes in armour. Her cheeks are stiff with drying tears, her lashes clumped, and she keeps one hand knotted in the fabric of her dress, fingers white where they clutch at the silk, as if the cloth were the only solid thing left in the world. Her father is alive. The word repeats with the slow, stunned insistence of a bell tolling in a winter fog. Alive. Not a head on a spike. Not a story ended in the sight of gods and men. Relief makes her dizzy. It is not clean. It comes mixed with the remembered terror of the sword's rise, with the way important words had been spoken in the sept, and then broken in the same breath. Yet under it all, something fragile uncurls. Gratitude. Gratitude toward Joffrey Baratheon, her golden prince, who had chosen mercy when he might have chosen blood. Is that not what the songs promised? That a true king would be terrible in war but gentle to maidens, that love could soften even a hard choice. In her chamber, the room feels both too small and too exposed. She moves to the window, then back to the bed, then to the mirror, unable to settle, as if still hearing the roar of the crowd under the vaulted stone. She tries to pray and finds the words slipping away from her, scattered like beads from a broken string. She does not know whether to thank the mother, or the father, or Joffrey himself. In the end, she thanks all three, in a whisper that trembles, because surely they have worked together in this. Cersei comes before the light has faded. The queen enters quietly, her gown whispering over the rushes, her face composed in a softness Sansa has rarely seen. She sits beside the girl on the bed with the particular care of a man placing something fragile on a table. Only Cersei Lannister is no man, and the fragility is a tool she understands. She speaks of clemency, of the king's heavy burden, of how difficult it is for a boy to balance justice and mercy beneath the shadow of his grandfather's expectations. "He did not need to spare your father," Cersei says, her voice low, intimate, almost kind. "Many urged him not to, but he thought of you." The words fall like warm water over frozen hands. Sansa feels them melt something inside her, feels the chains of her loyalty tighten with a quiet, unseen click. If Joffrey can be cruel in public and merciful in private, is that not proof of depth, of hidden understanding the small folk could never see? Later, when the queen has gone and the room smells of her perfume and Sansa's dried fear, Sansa drifts toward the door at the sound of raised voices in the outer solar. She does not mean to listen. She does not. But the door is half closed, the stone carries sound, and stillness takes her before she can step away. She hears Cersei first, the hiss under the words. "He made you look weak," the Queen is saying. "Your grandfather sends one raven from Harrenhal and suddenly the brave king cannot swing his own sword? Do you think the realm will not see it?" There is a muttered reply, sharp with a boy's wounded pride. Tywin. The name is a shadow between them. The choice was not Joffrey's. The mercy was not Joffrey's. She hears enough. The way a man like Tywin Lannister can reach from leagues away and turn death into exile, pride into obedience. The way important words in the Sept had been nothing beside a single command from Harrenhal. At the window again, Sansa watches the courtyard sink into darkness, the torches pricking the dusk like scattered embers. Somewhere beyond that horizon, her father will ride north, toward a wall she has never seen, into a winter she can only imagine. If he can live there, she tells herself, perhaps she can live here. Perhaps she can endure this court, this boy, this queen, long enough to see him again. What does it cost to wait? What will it make of her, to smile at the king who tried to kill her father, and failed only because another man's word weighed more than his crown? She does not know yet, but the court is already watching her window. The square is a room without walls, a hollow of stone and sky where sound gathers and will not escape. Arya stands near the edge of it, small and thin in the press of bodies, Yoren's rough hand clamped on her shoulder, needle hidden against her palm. Her fingers ache from the white-knuckled grip. From the way a man holds to a railing in a storm, he does not understand. She watches the steps. She watches her father. The breath goes out of the world when she sees him brought forward in chains. When she hears the word traitor thrown like rotten fruit, she does not hear everything. She hears enough. She hears the way important words are shaped for a crowd. Mercy, king, confession. She hears her own pulse, loud as any drum. When the sword rises, her lungs forget their work. It is a stillness like falling. She has imagined 100 times how she would move, how she would cut through the ankles of the gold cloaks, how she would reach him. She does not move at all. Yoren's arm is iron across her chest. The world narrows to steel and sunlight, and then it does not fall. The pattern breaks with almost obscene quiet. A shout from the steps, a Lannister cloak flashing crimson, a royal word bitten off and swallowed. The headsman's blade hesitates, hangs there, trembling slightly in the air, a shadow of death without the cost paid. Ned Stark is turned, not struck. He is led away, not carried. Confusion comes first, sharp and disorienting. The crowd surges in little ripples of anger and relief. Arya feels as if someone has pulled the ground half a step to the side beneath her feet. He lives. He is condemned, they say, sent to the wall, stripped of name and honour. But he lives. Yoren bends his head to hers, his breath hot and sour in the cool morning. He speaks of danger, of Lannister tempers, of how kings do not forgive men they have tried and failed to kill. He does not soften it for her, does not pretend this reprieve is safety. Any Stark in this city is a hostage, he tells her, and a hostage is only as alive as he is useful. She wants to follow her father north. The thought takes her like fire, sudden and absolute. There is a road that leads to the wall, there are horses, there are gates. What if she simply runs to the stables now, steals a mount, rides until winter air cuts her lungs? What if the single wild choice of a girl becomes the hinge upon which everything else turns? Instead she stands, listening to the murmurs fade, feeling the shape of her hatred settle differently inside her. She has not seen the sword bite. She has not watched his head fall. The darkness in her is colder for it, less a scream than a long, low note. Joffrey, Cersei, the gold cloaks, the red lion she has seen on Lannister banners. They blur at the edges, yet her distrust has already hardened into something that will not melt. Her list of names, barely formed, shifts like wet ink. They are titles more than faces now. King, Queen, Lion. She does not whisper them tonight with tears choking her. She files them away with the particular care of a man placing something fragile on a table, knowing he will need it later. Yoren insists. The city is a trap, and the jaws are closing. He can put her on the King's Road with his ragged boys, hide her hair, hide her name, carry her north under the very noses of the men who would use her. Toward the wall, he says, toward that frozen edge of the world. She hesitates only once more, looking back at the empty steps where the sword had hung. Somewhere beyond the river and the hills and the long grey miles, her father will be walking too, in chains or in black, but walking. If she goes that way, if she endures the mud and the hunger and the fear, perhaps the road will bend them together again. So she nods. She lets Yoren cut her hair. She lets Needle vanish up her sleeve. She chooses the path that feels like disappearance and tells herself it is only a longer route to the same man. She does not know yet that the wall swallows names. She does not know yet what it will make of a girl who walks toward it, carrying a list of shadows instead of a single, searing death. But the city is already forgetting the almost execution, turning back to its games, and the northward road is waiting to take her, step by perilous step, into a different kind of darkness. What if, while the city forgets, and the road takes Arya north into its long, patient darkness, another ravened word is already beating its wings toward Winterfell? The great hall is half in shadow when it arrives. The fire on the dais burns low and steady, throwing a quiet, restless light over stone and fur and the faces of men waiting for news they cannot yet name. The raven's cry cuts across the room with the thin, sharp sound of metal on stone, and every conversation dies the way a man drops a cup when he hears a child scream. Robb takes the parchment himself. His fingers are clumsy on the cord, then very careful, with the particular care of a man placing something fragile on a table. The wax bears the royal seal. The way important words sit on that broken circle of red tells him, before he has read a line, that whatever is inside will cost him something he cannot easily pay. He reads in silence Ned's confession, the naming of treason, the sentence of the wall. He does not speak for a long moment. The hall waits. You can almost hear the fire settling in the grate, the small private sounds of winter wood giving way. Catelyn is watching his face, because she has learned over years of marriage the way a man's eyes change when he is asked to endure more than is fair. Relief comes first, shocking and bright. Ned lives. He breathes somewhere under the same sky. It hits her so hard, she has to close her hand around the edge of the bench to steady herself. Then the other feelings arrive, layered and knotted, fury, cold and thin, at Lannister mouths, shaping the word traitor around Ned Stark's name. Fear, deeper and more dangerous. For Sansa still in their hands, for Arya lost between this hall and that distant poisoned city. Understanding, bitter as old snowmelt, that a man sent to the wall is not simply spared, he is taken. Robb's thoughts move in a rough, circling pattern. What if his father had died there in the square, clean and terrible? The choice would be simple then. Banners, war, the red road south. But this is not that. His father is alive, bound not by chains he can cut, but by oaths and proclamations and the thin, cruel mercy of a boy king who thinks the wall is a place to throw away problems. He feels the urge to ride anyway, to answer the insult with steel. Something in Jon's chest moves when he hears the first murmurs of war from the gathered lords. But this is Robb's hall, Robb's decision, and Jon holds his tongue. The debates begin almost at once. Great Jon roars for war, for Lannister blood, for the old answer to southern arrogance. Others, river lords with Tully caution in their bones, speak of hostages and terms. As long as Lord Stark lives, they say, there is room to bargain, to trade gold and titles and perhaps even Sansa's hand for his safe return. Why throw the North into open rebellion when the game can still be played with words? Robb listens. He hears the hunger for vengeance, the fear of cost, the way important words like duty and king slide into the room and change its temperature. He does not call himself king, not yet. He speaks of his father instead. of a Lord of Winterfell branded falsely, of a sentence that cannot stand. When he finally rises, the hall stills. He does not promise conquest, he promises to march, not for a dead man's honour, but for a living man's release. The banners will come, not to avenge a murder, but to make certain the wall does not keep what it has no right to claim. It is a quieter war, he imagines, more negotiation than glory, but the road south is opening all the same, and every step upon it will carry its own shadow. The banners will come, they say, and the words move through the camp like a low fire catching in dry grass. Catelyn hears them and feels no triumph. Hope, when it comes this late, has edges. She walks to the godswood because there is nowhere else to set those edges down. The air beneath the trees is colder, the way a man feels colder once he has stepped out of a noisy hall into winter night. Red leaves stir above her, whispering against one another, and the slow drip of water from some hidden pool marks the silence, patient and indifferent. She lays her forehead against the weirwood's pale bark, the chill of it biting into her skin, and closes her eyes as if darkness might make the path clearer. What if she had never seized Tyrion on that inn's stair? What if she had not believed Petyr Baelish when he spoke of daggers and Lannister plots, the way important words always seem to fall from his tongue, wrapped in old memories and half-truths? She sees Bran's small body in a feather bed, motionless, and herself riding away from Winterfell all the same, telling herself there was no other choice. Every step since has carried its own shadow, and here she is with her husband alive but caged in a southern city where lions make the law. She does not pray for justice. Not yet. She prays for understanding of the cost. In Robb's tent the air is close, thick with the smell of canvas and damp wool. The murmur of the camp is a muted sea beyond the leather walls. Robb stands over the map table, hands braced, the posture of a boy trying very hard to be a man. He speaks of crossings and scouts, of Lord Frey's delays, of how quickly they must move if they are to unsettle Tywin before he can gather fully. She listens, then sets her hand upon the table with the particular care of a man placing something fragile on a table, though it is only parchment beneath her palm. "Your father lives," she says, and the word lives is heavier than any stone. "His life hangs now on Lannister goodwill. Do you mean to shake the very hand that holds him?" Robb's jaw tightens. He does not look away. "They will not yield father for quiet words. Only strength will make them bargain. If we show our throat, they will cut it." The argument is not shouted. It is worse for being quiet. She reminds him of Tywin Lannister's nature, of the way a man like that hoards hostages and marriages, not corpses. She asks, almost against her will, whether a slower war, a more careful one, might keep Ned Stark breathing long enough for ravens and terms to matter. What if, she thinks, the single decision that seemed so small, how quickly to cross a river, how sharply to press a retreating foe, becomes the hinge upon which her children's lives turn? When she leaves him, there is no victory in it, only a resolve taking shape, cold and hard as the bark beneath her brow. If war must come, she will not stand only behind Robb's shoulder. She will move between camps and kings as something more than a grieving wife. Ned is a living hostage, and she will carry the fact of his beating heart into every room where men speak of terms. She will remind Tywin that a dead Stark is a banner, but a living one is a coin that can be spent. She will face Walder Frey's sly eyes, and if she must, swallow every shred of pride before that crumbling bridge. That night, beneath the red leaves, she does not pray for vengeance. She asks the old gods for the wisdom to choose the path that keeps the most of her children alive, even if it means bending her neck before lions and Freys alike. Somewhere, far to the south, Ned Stark breathes in the dark, and Catelyn feels the shape of a new, narrower road opening before her. She cannot yet see who will be waiting at the end of it. Far to the south, the road Catelyn cannot yet see bends back toward the Red Keep, where the air still tastes of incense and fear. The sept's echoes have barely faded when another kind of stillness settles, closer, more dangerous. The hush of a queen closing her son's chamber door with the particular care of a man placing something fragile on a table. Cersei does not raise her voice. She does not need to. Her anger moves in quiet lines, the way important words sometimes do when they are meant to cut rather than crash. She stands between Joffrey and the window, the city's torches at her back, and speaks of obedience, of the cost of defying Lord Tywin's command in full view of court and gods. What if the raven had come an hour later? What if her father had not written at all? Joffrey's pride is a raw, exposed thing. The boy king hears only that his choice was stayed, that the man on his knees in the sept lives because someone far away decided it would be so. He does not think of hostages or alliances, only of the way a man looked at him and begged, and how satisfying it had been to imagine the sword falling. Now that vision has been stolen. In the small, overheated room, resentment takes root. He speaks of the day when ravens will fly from Casterly Rock, and he will crumple their words in his fist. He speaks of a time when he is not merely king in name, but master in truth, when no one, neither his mother, nor his hand, nor the old lion in the west, will gainsay him. Cersei watches his mouth form these promises and understands, with a cold clarity, that Tywin has checked the act, but not the hunger behind it. Elsewhere in the castle, the small council turns the same choice over like a coin. Varys murmurs in his soft, unthreatening way about the wisdom of keeping Eddard Stark alive, about the leverage a living lord provides in a winter of shifting loyalties. Littlefinger, listening, sees only new angles. A Stark father in chains, a northern son with banners raised, a market of fear and favour opening between them. Pycelle simpers about Lord Tywin's unmatched prudence, his beard trembling as he praises the restraint that the king, conspicuously, did not show. Cersei walks back from that council with a familiar weight in her chest. Once again, her father's word has reached across mountains and rivers to close a hand around her life, around her son's reign. She is furious, at the shadow he casts, at the understanding that he is right. A living Stark steadies their claim. A dead one sets the north on fire. Later, when the castle has gone to darkness, Joffrey slips from his bed and stands before the Iron Throne. He studies the blades, the way a man might study a map. He imagines carefully whose heads he will one day take, and this time there is no voice in the room to say no. Tywin's command has brought a pause, not a cure. The steel waits, and so does he. What if the command that stills a sword in King's Landing sends a different kind of tremor through the night far away, where the fire is low and the road dust has not yet settled? Tyrion Lannister sits by a thin campfire on the road from the Vale, the flames doing little against the press of coming winter when the rider finds them. Hoofbeats, a muttered challenge from one of his hill tribe escorts, the exchange of a crumpled scrap of parchment. The way important words change, a man's face travels faster than the words themselves. Stark lives, Bronn says, flat, as if commenting on the weather. The boy king was stayed. There is a quiet in Tyrion then, brief and clean. Surprise first, like a cup knocked over. Relief after, slower, settling in the way a man sits back in a chair he did not know was supporting him. He takes the parchment, reads Tywin's cold instruction, and huffs something that is not quite laughter. So, he murmurs, father has discovered the cost of theatrics. He does not raise his voice. He does not speak of Joffrey by name. He studies the fire instead, as if the shadows there might arrange themselves into his father's profile. Inside, the arithmetic begins. A dead Eddard Stark is a clean story, a martyr whose blood writes banners. A living Eddard Stark is a problem, a hostage, an insult carefully preserved in chains, The North will not forget either choice, but one gives them a ghost to rally behind, the other a father to bargain for. Which burns longer? Which burns colder? Tyrion knows the way honour works on men like Ned Stark. He has seen it in the Eyrie, in the stiff line of Catelyn's jaw, in the boy lord's trembling sense of justice. He understands that this commuted sentence does not erase the blade that almost fell. It only moves it, from neck to heart, from public square to private room. He imagines, unbidden, the wall, stone and ice and wind like knives. Ned Stark there in black, not as Lord of Winterfell, but as something narrower and more enduring. What if, he wonders, the man took the black instead of rotting in some southern cell? What would it mean for the Night's Watch to have a Stark with his eyes open to southern lies, and a Lannister who has already walked that curtain of ice? He sees, for a moment, the two of them in the Lord Commander's chamber, the fire low, speaking of duty the way a man speaks of an old wound. Tyrion with his wine, Ned with his silence, measuring the darkness beyond the wall with the particular care of a man placing something fragile on a table. Would they have believed each other then about what stirs in the snow? The thought does not comfort him. It only widens the board. Already he can feel the pull of King's Landing, of Joffrey's cruelty straining against Tywin's strategy. He understands more clearly than either of them that someone will have to stand between the boy's whims and the old man's design to translate one madness into something the realm can survive. Who else among the lions will trouble themselves to see the wolves as anything but enemies? He lifts his cup at last, cheap wine catching the firelight, and offers a small crooked toast to the cold air. "To Lord Eddard," he says softly. "May the worst of us keep you alive, for reasons that have nothing to do with justice." The wine burns. The shadows lean closer. The game, he knows, has just become more complicated, and somewhere far to the south, blades are being sheathed with the same hands that will one day draw them again. They take Ned Stark from the darkness of the Red Keep before dawn, when the city is at its quietest and even the bells seem to be holding their breath. Chains bite at his wrists, not cruelly tight, but with the particular care of a man placing something fragile on a table, as if the gold cloaks understand that this is not a common prisoner, and that the cost of breaking him too soon would be higher than any of their lives. The courtyard stones are still damp from the night. Hooves ring against them, iron on old rock, the sound echoing up between towers that have watched kings rise and fall. Ned keeps his back straight as they lead him to the waiting horse, the way a man does when he has nothing left to bargain with but the manner of his going. He does not look up at the windows where he once stood as hand. He does not look back at the Red Keep at all. His gaze fixes north, on a line of wall and sky beyond the city's gate that he cannot yet see. Outside the walls, King's Landing recedes faster than he expects. The smell of rotten smoke gives way to open air, to dust and grass and the far-off glimmer of the Blackwater. Around him, the escort settles into its rhythm. The clatter of armour, the low murmur of men who have ridden this road 100 times, and never with such a burden. One rides close, and after a long silence, offers him a water skin without meeting his eyes. Another laughs too loudly at some joke, spits the word traitor with an ease that speaks of tavern talk and royal proclamations. Ned listens, and in the listening understands how far he has fallen in the realm's imagination, and how little that changes the thing at his centre. At night, when they make camp, he sits a little apart, still bound, facing the north. A young sergeant, Riverlands born, asks in a hesitant voice if Winterfell is truly as cold as they say. Ned answers simply. He speaks of hot springs and stone walls that hold their warmth, of snow that comes early and stays, of a godswood where the heart tree watches in red and white. The man thanks him as if he has been given a story instead of a sentence. Others avoid his eyes, uncomfortable with the quiet dignity of a lord already half turned into a brother of the Watch. What if this is the last road he ever rides as Eddard Stark of Winterfell? What if the wall, which once stood in his mind as a distant line of duty and punishment, becomes now the only place where he can still be of use? His thoughts drift ahead of the horses, to the wall itself, where he had ridden as a boy beside Benjen, full of a young man's certainty that winter and darkness were tales to make children shiver. To the stories old Nan whispered of the long night and pale riders in the snow, stories he filed away in the same room of his mind where he kept other dangerous truths. To the night he promised Catelyn, with his hand over hers, that he would never take the black, that he would not leave her to hold Winterfell alone. That promise lies broken now, not by choice but by necessity, and he turns it over in his mind the way a man turns a blade in his hand, testing the edge. At the wall there will be no lordship, no banners, no southern games. Stripped of title and name, he may finally have the freedom to look unflinching at the truths he buried in stone and silence. Jon Snow's parentage, Lyanna's last bed of blood and roses, the understanding that the real war has never been for a throne of swords, but for the living world itself. He imagines Jon in Winterfell's yard, sword in hand, the particular stillness of the boy when he listens, the way important words land in him and stay. Something in Jon's chest moves, he thinks, when he is given a task worthy of him. Will the wall call to that part of the boy as it once called to Benjen, or will Jon's duty now lie elsewhere, in halls of stone and in Sansa's careful counsel? Days pass. The air cools. The land changes, soft southern green giving way to harder lines, to bare branches and earth that remembers frost. When they finally cross the invisible border into the north, no horn sounds, no banner marks the line. Only the wind shifts, carrying with it a scent he has known since childhood. Snow and pine and distant ice. The first flakes begin to fall as the light fades, small and tentative, then steadier. Ned lifts his face to them, eyes closed, letting the cold sting his skin. Home, he thinks, though the home that waits for him is made of ice and vows and long sleepless nights. His lips move around a whisper that is more breath than word. I'm coming, he says to Winterfell, to the wall, to the shadows gathering beyond it. I'm coming home. He does not yet know who or what is waiting on the other side of that ice. And in the darkness beyond the wall, something old and patient has already begun to listen. South of that listening darkness, another kind of winter is on the move. Robb's host goes south the way a storm front moves across a plain, slow and inexorable. Banners of the grey direwolf snapping against a pale sky. The ground trembles under hooves and iron. Campfires bloom and die each night like brief, stubborn stars. Yet the songs that rise from those fires are quieter than in the tale men think they know. They do not sing of a dead lord and a son's unquenchable vengeance. They sing of a father taken, not slain, and of bringing him home. Around those fires, the talk shifts with that single altered word. Men speak of terms, of hostages traded, of the way a man might bend without quite breaking, if it means seeing his lord ride back through Winterfell's gate alive. There is anger, yes, and fear, and the old northern understanding that Lannister gold comes wrapped in shadow and blood. But vengeance has not yet hardened into a crown. In the command tent, the air feels different. The Great Jon looms over the map, jabbing at the south with a meaty finger, his voice a low growl as he speaks of kings and broken oaths. The river lords roar from burned villages, and dead kin murmur their assent. It takes very little in that close canvas room for someone to say it aloud. King in the north. The words hang there, heavy, the way important words always do when they first enter a room. In another life, they would ignite like dry tinder. Here, with Ned Stark still breathing in a southern cell, they smoulder instead. Robb listens. He does not answer at once. He thinks of his father's face, the set of his mouth when he spoke of Robert's rebellion, of the cost of breaking faith with a sworn king. He thinks of the letter that told them Ned lived, disgraced, condemned, but not yet executed, held up at court like a lesson. What does it mean to name yourself a king while your father remains a lord, bound in chains beneath the same iron throne you would reject? When he speaks, his voice is steady. He speaks of justice, not secession. He speaks of loyal resistance, of marching not to tear the realm apart, but to force it to remember its own laws. Release Lord Eddard Stark. Restore him as Warden of the North. Redress the wrongs done in the Riverlands. These are his terms, laid out with the particular care of a man placing something fragile on a table and waiting to see who will break it. The pattern breaks there, for a moment. What if the North rides not to found a kingdom, but to demand that the one they have live up to its own promises? What if the young wolf never quite becomes a legend, because the boy beneath the name refuses to put a crown above his father? At the Twins, that choice changes the air. The towers rise from the river mist, damp stone and suspicion, and Walder Frey counts banners with his sharp old eyes. In one tally, he sees a rebel boy king whose cause may die with him. In this one, he sees something colder, the prospect of alliance with a still legitimate Lord of Winterfell, a Warden of the North, whose name still carries weight in every hall from White Harbour to the Eyrie. The calculation shifts. A marriage pact is still demanded, crossings still sold dearly, but the old man feels the ground under him less uncertain when he ties his house to a living Stark patriarch rather than a boy who would tear free of the realm entirely. And so Robb rides across the Green Fork not beneath a crown, but beneath the same direwolf he has always borne, a young war leader whose story has not yet crystallised into song. The men call him Lord, not King. The river runs on beneath his horse's hooves, carrying south a quieter kind of fire, and the question of northern independence drifts beside it, unresolved, waiting for the next choice to give it shape. What if, while the river carries Robb south, another kind of current gathers in the blackened bones of Harrenhal? What if the quiet choice of one old lion, far from any cheering crowd, bends the war more than any crowned boy on a throne? Smoke hangs in the ruined halls when Tywin returns, a low, bitter haze that softens nothing. The towers rise around him like burnt fingers clawing at a grey sky. In the yard, forges spit orange fire into the darkness of broken stone, the ring of hammers echoing in rooms that once held kings. He walks through it without haste, cloak brushing ash, until he stands again before the long table where the Riverlands lie in miniature. The map is already cluttered, but he makes more room. With the particular care of a man placing something fragile on a table, he moves carved lions from the Golden Tooth to the fords, from the fords to the crossroads, adjusting angles, distances, the way a man might adjust the tilt of a sword before a duel. Opposite them, small direwolves mark reports of a northern host, drifting south through the neck like winter itself, learning the roads. He does not see a king in those wolves, not yet. There is no crown on Robb Stark's head, no formal word of northern independence, only a lord riding to answer an insult and retrieve a father. Ned Stark lives. That single fact changes the weight of every piece on the board. The North's loyalty, in Tywin's understanding, is not yet broken from the Iron Throne. It is only strained, pulled between blood and law. So he speaks of restraint, though the room smells of burning. Sir Gregor and the other hard men stand before him, expecting license, the kind of free hand that turns villages into stories whispered in the dark. Tywin's voice stays level. They are to burn, yes, but not everywhere. The Tully lands must feel fire, must feel cost, but the road north is to be left with gaps, untouched pockets, where ravens can still fly and envoys might still pass. Why drive the Starks into a war for freedom, when they might be held in a war for ransom? In the privacy of his solar, the plan takes a colder shape. Ned Stark as future hand in quiet exile, ruling Winterfell under a Lannister shadow. Ned Stark as the face of a regency, his honour used as a shield for Lannister rule until the boy in King's Landing comes of age. The way important words like loyalty and duty sound in northern ears could be turned if spoken by the right mouth. Ravens go out that night, one to Cersei, the phrases edged with warning and opportunity, one to Pycelle, full of legalities, precedent, the dry armour that makes a trap feel like order. Perhaps even one to Walder Frey, not yet a dagger laid against a wedding feast, but the first quiet suggestion that bridges can serve more than one master. What kind of war grows from snares like these, set in shadow rather than song? The trap is ink on parchment, and yet its teeth are steel. While ravens beat their way through the upper air, another kind of net tightens in the red stone below, where a girl in a pale dress is summoned to stand before a table that has decided the cost of kingdoms. Sansa feels the small council chamber before she truly sees it. The cool of the flagstones under her slippers, the hush that falls when the guards close the door, the way the long polished surface of the table gleams like ice in weak firelight. Littlefinger's lazy smile waits for her at one end, all soft corners and sharp shadow. Varys's soft eyes regard her from the other, unreadable, as if he is listening to words no one has spoken aloud. Between them, Cersei sits, her gaze an assessing blade. The queen does not waste time on comfort. She speaks of order, of mercy, of the way a man like her father understands the uses of both. Then, with the particular care of a man placing something fragile on a table, she sets the truth down in front of Sansa. Lord Eddard Stark has confessed. He has been spared. He is already on the road north, bound for the wall. Hope flares so bright in Sansa's chest that for a heartbeat the room blurs. Her father lives. The word itself is a kind of prayer. Lives. And then Cersei lets the rest of the net fall. His life, she explains, depends on the continued good behaviour of his daughters. Any whisper of disloyalty, any northern folly, any attempt to flee or send secret word, and the understanding between lions and wolf will end. The way important words are chosen makes the threat feel almost gentle. It is not. It is a leash. Sansa has worn courtesy the way a child wears silk, as something lovely, assumed, meant to please. Now, standing in that quiet room, she feels it harden into something else. Armour, perhaps, or a mask that might yet keep steel from her father's throat. She does not think of songs. She thinks of cost, of choice, of how still she must hold herself so that Joffrey's temper, Cersei's pride, Tywin's distant will never find reason to turn toward the wall. When she begs to write to her father, her voice hardly trembles. Cersei allows it, of course. A dutiful daughter must send dutiful words. The first letter is written under the Queen's eye, every line smoothed, every mention of fear or doubt scraped away until only a bright, thin hope remains. Later, another follows, and another, each one passing through Pycelle's spotted hands, each one clipped, corrected, made safe. Yet ravens sometimes carry more than one message. Varys lingers a moment too long when he takes the folded parchment, his fingers light on the seal. He does not promise anything. He does not need to. Sansa feels, without quite knowing why, that somewhere beyond the capital's darkness, a truer word may yet fly north, that her careful phrases might be read with the understanding of a man who has known winter all his life. At night she kneels by her bed. Once she prayed for a golden prince and a wedding cloak heavy with jewels. Now she prays for something smaller and far more difficult. The strength to endure this gilded prison long enough to see her father's face again. Her innocence bends under the weight of it, but does not yet break. Outside her shuttered window, the city murmurs, restless, waiting. If a girl in silk begins to watch and listen as her father once did, what quiet fire might she carry between north and capital? And who, exactly, is watching her in return? Far from the murmuring city and its shuttered rooms, the road north is mud and ruts and the slow, stubborn trudge of men in chains. Yoren's ragged caravan moves like a small, disordered shadow along the King's Road, the stink of unwashed bodies and horse dung hanging in the damp air, the promise of the wall's cold darkness always somewhere ahead, just out of sight. Arya rides among them with her hair hacked short and her face smudged, Arry the orphan boy in the daylight, Eddard Stark's daughter only in the quiet places of her own mind. She keeps her head down when Yoren barks, when the recruits jostle and curse, when one of the older men laughs the way a man laughs who has forgotten softer rooms and gentler company. But beneath the rough wool and the dirt, she clings to a single Steady image. Her father alive, standing on black stone, the wind of the far north pulling at his grey cloak. At night, when the fire burns low and most of the men snore, she curls close to the wagon wheels and whispers to herself. Once, in another turning of the world, those whispers would have been a list of names, a litany of death recited like a prayer. Here the words are different. Father, Jon, Robb, Mother, Sansa, Bran. She tastes each one with the particular care of a man placing something fragile on a table, feeling the way important words reshape the space inside her chest. She does not yet know what she will say when she finds him. She knows only that she must. That is the choice that steadies her hands when they shake. Yoren watches her more than he lets on. One night, when the wind cuts sharp and the fire is a mean little thing, he settles beside her and speaks of the wall the way a man might speak of a hard winter, without romance, without kindness. No place for highborn girls, he says, voice low. No place for lords' daughters who think their names will shield them. If they learn who you are, little wolf, they own you, they own him. The word own hangs between them, heavy with cost. Ned's safety is not a fact. It is a bargain, and bargains can be broken. So when Lannister riders appear one afternoon in a shimmer of mail and crimson cloaks, Arya feels her whole body reach forward before her mind can catch it. What if she simply rode out, named herself, demanded to be taken to her father? What if a single, reckless word could carry her straight to him? The thought flares, bright and terrible. Then she sees the lion on their chests, remembers Sansa in a tower, her father in a cell, and she swallows it back until it burns. Yoren answers the soldiers' questions with mud on his boots and boredom in his voice. He does not look at her. She does not look at them. They pass. Rumours ride the road with them after that. Talk of fighting in the Riverlands, of wolves gathering, of Lord Tywin's banners moving like a red tide. Each tale is a hand tugging at her sleeve, urging her to run faster, to break from this slow, filthy procession and sprint toward whatever battlefield holds her brother. Each time, she stays. Pattern interrupts resolve in small ways. A boy in the wagon shares a crust with her and asks what she will be at the wall. The question is simple, but it opens a sudden, aching understanding. She is not going to be anything at the wall. She is going to find someone. On the nights when sleep will not come, she sits apart, needle laid across her knees, its thin blade catching the uncertain firelight. North is only a darkness beyond the trees, but she stares into it as if she could already see the wall's vast shadow. Whatever face she must wear, whatever name she must answer to, she promises herself that she will stand before her father again on those black stones. The road is long, the world is dangerous. She rises anyway, each dawn, and walks toward him. What if the letter never arrives? What if the raven that should knit north and south together in warning is delayed a day or turned aside by storm, and the wall must face its darkness with no word at all from Ned Stark? Castle Black does not care for such questions. It stands as it has always stood, a black scar against an endless white, its curtain walls crumbling, its towers half abandoned, its great gatehouse flanked by drifted snow that the wind scours and reshapes each night. The yard is a hard-packed sheet of frozen mud and old ice. Steel rings there in the thin winter light as the Black brothers drill, shadows moving against the higher shadow of the wall itself. Jon moves among them, breath smoking, wooden sword in hand. Gren comes at him too wide, all strength and no understanding, and Jon turns the blow aside almost gently, the way a man moves a child away from a fire. Pip circles with quick feet and quicker tongue, looking for an opening he will not find. Jon corrects them between passes. A word here. The set of a shoulder there, with the particular care of a man placing something fragile on a table. He does not think of himself as a boy any longer. Not here. The black wool on his back, the rough stone under his boots, the cold that seeps into his bones at night. All of it has begun to feel less like punishment and more like a choice he has made and must now honour. And yet, beneath that hardening layer, something in Jon's chest moves whenever he lets himself remember Winterfell's warm rooms. The smell of baking bread, the way important words sounded in his father's voice. He had come to the wall in part to escape that voice, or the silence around it. Bastard. Snow. The names had been a shadow at every feast, at every council where he stood behind Robb's chair, instead of sitting beside it. Here, among Jorah Mormont's gruff commands and Ser Alice's cutting scorn, there is a strange relief in being only Snow among 100 other names spoken without lineage. The old bear watches him sometimes from the Lord Commander's balcony, a heavy shape wrapped in furs, eyes narrowed. He speaks of duty, of the long winter, of the cost men pay to hold this thin line of stone and ice. In Mormont's rough approval, Jon feels uneasily the echo of another man's withheld praise. With Samwell Tarly, he finds something different. A quiet, book-lined room in human form, a companion who flinches from the sword but not from truth. Gren, Pip, the other recruits, they are beginning slowly to feel like a new kind of family, a chosen one. But is it enough to answer the old hunger for his father's simple, steady regard? Beyond the wall, the woods whisper. Dead men have walked back to Castle Black on stiff, unanswering legs. Rangers return with stories of strange tracks in the snow, of blue eyes glimpsed where no fire burns. The tales move through the castle like smoke, thin and unsettling. Jon listens, frowning, but the true shape of the threat remains beyond his understanding, a war still wrapped in shadow. The day the raven comes, the sky is a hard, colourless dome, and the wind cuts straight through leather and wool. Its wings beat down into the yard in a flurry of black against white. Men pause, swords lower. In the rookery above, Maester Aemon's blind hands break the seal by touch alone. Jon cannot see the parchment, cannot hear the word that waits there, but his heart is suddenly pounding in his chest, as if some part of him already knows that whatever message flies north today will reach not only the wall, but the boy who thought he had left his father's world behind. The raven's message becomes iron on the road. By the time the gates of Castle Black groan open, Ned Stark's fate has been measured, weighed, and written in a dozen southern hands. Yet it arrives here as something simpler. A man on a tired horse, wrapped in thin, stained wool, riding beneath a sky the colour of old bone. The brothers of the Night's Watch stand in their ordered line, black cloaks stirring in the wind, a dark seam against the snow. They have been told to expect a lord. What rides through the gate does not look like one. Chains at his wrists, no sword at his hip, no dire wolf on his breast, only the plain roughness of travel-worn cloth. The contrast is almost brutal. The way a man stripped of his titles looks smaller against so much black. Jon feels it before he understands it. A prickle at the back of his neck. The hush that falls over the yard. The way important words sometimes still a room before they are spoken aloud. He steps forward because everyone is stepping forward. Because he is first ranger now in all but name. Because habit carries him. Then the rider lifts his head. Something in Jon's chest moves, sharp and bewildered, like a bird startled in a cage. For a heartbeat he sees only the lines that were not there when they parted, the grey in the beard, the hollowness about the eyes. Then recognition strikes, and the world narrows until there is only his father, in chains, in rags, at the wall. He does not call out. The sound that tears loose is too raw to be a word. Ned blinks against the light, searching, and when his gaze finds Jon, all the stiff formality of a prisoner before strange men slips. For an instant, he is only a father who had not expected to see his son again in this life. Their first true meeting happens later, in the Lord Commander's quarters, with the door pulled almost closed, almost because old wood never quite obeys. The room smells of tallow and old parchment, of cold stone trying to remember fire. Ned sits with the particular care of a man placing something fragile on a table, as if even the act of lowering himself to the chair might break what thin composure he has left. He speaks of King's Landing in pieces, never lingering long on any one image. The sept, the sword, the choice forced upon him. He does not say Joffrey's name often, but when he does, there is a shadow in it. Guilt threads every pause. He confesses not only to treason before a boy king, but to smaller treasons. The promises he never fulfilled to Jon, the truths he held back, the cost of that silence. Jon listens, hands clenched on his knees, understanding more in what Ned cannot quite bring himself to say. What if his father had died there? What if this exile is not a punishment, but a last hard mercy? When Ned takes the black, he does it without ceremony, voice steady, eyes clear. The words are familiar on his tongue, old vows given new weight. He resolves quietly to serve here as he served Winterfell, to count the men, to see the cracks in the wall's strength, to stand between the realm and the darkness that creeps at its edges. But beneath that, there is another layer, unspoken. Atonement, a chance to protect in a way that does not depend on southern honour or shifting thrones. Later, father and son stand atop the wall, the wind cutting through wool and leather alike. The haunted forest stretches out before them, a sea of black and grey. Beyond it, only distance and the cold suggestion of things moving where no man walks. Jon watches Ned's profile against the pale sky and feels the shape of the future tilt. Exile has brought them to the very edge of the world. It feels suddenly less like an ending and more like a beginning. Ned's hand tightens briefly on the ice-rimed stone. "Whatever comes," he murmurs, more to the wind than to Jon. "It will come from there." Neither of them yet knows how literal those words will prove, or how soon the shadows in that forest will start to move. Word spreads slowly at first, like smoke through canvas seams. A muttered word from a Karstark scout, a half-believed report from a wayhouse in the neck, and then the thing is certain. Eddard Stark has not died in the Great Sept. He has taken the black. The next council after that knowing feels different. The tent is close and warm, heavy with the mixed smells of horse, tallow, damp wool. Candles gutter over the map-strewn table, their light catching the hard lines of Great Janumba's jaw, the pinched, restless set of Rickard Karstark's mouth, the unreadable stillness in Rose Bolton's pale eyes. Robb stands at the head of the table the way a man stands on a lake whose ice he no longer trusts. They argue first about words. What is a lord who has sworn the night's watch? What is a father who cannot come home? Karstark's voice is tight, the grief for his sons already searching for a clean shape. He speaks of vengeance denied, of oaths broken in King's Landing that cannot be answered, while Ned Stark lives bound to a different vow. A man of the watch, he says, has no claim to Winterfell, no right to call banners, no place in the game they are now playing. Umber snorts, great shoulders rolling. Black or no, he is still Eddard Stark, he growls, the way important words are growled when they have lived in a man's bones for years. I bent the knee to him. I did not bend it to lions. For him, the choice is not a question of law, but of understanding. The Lord of Winterfell is the man who kept the North whole through long, quiet winters. A black cloak does not erase that. Around them, the fire pops. Shadows jump across the painted rivers and mountains. The talk circles back again and again to a crown that no one quite dares to name. Without a murdered lord to avenge, without a head on a spike to point to. The case for Robb as king in the north frays at the edges. What if the single decision that seemed so small in King's Landing, a command to send a man to the wall instead of the headsman's block, becomes the hinge upon which their new kingdom fails to form? Then someone quietly lays a different thought on the table with the particular care of a man placing something fragile on a table. If the Lannisters want peace, let them prove it. Let them recall Eddard Stark from his vows, restore him to his seat, make whole what they tried to break. It is a legally thin thing, almost an absurdity, yet the room leans toward it. The very impossibility reveals how much they still look north, past Robb's young face to the absent man whose shadow fills the tent. Robb listens. He does not speak for a long time. He hears his own title shifting in the mouths around him. Lord of Winterfell, Regent, maybe King. Each name costs something different. Each one feels, now, like it belongs to a man who is standing in another man's place. When the council breaks, the maps lie scattered, rivers and roads vanishing into darkness where the candle has gone out. Robb remains, hands braced on the table. He is fighting for a father who cannot openly rule, for a house whose true head lives in exile at the end of the world. His own name, his own shape, seems trapped in that long, quiet shadow. Outside, the camp's fires burn low. Somewhere beyond them, beyond the next battle and the next raven, a black-clad figure walks the wall, and the North waits to decide what it remembers. What if the next raven that finds them does not carry news of a battle, but an offer laid out with the particular care of a man placing something fragile on a table? In the small council chamber, the air feels close, the way a room does when too many important words are about to be spoken. The raven from Harrenhal waits beside the inkwell, its black eyes dull now, its message already broken open. Pycelle's hands tremble only slightly as he unrolls the parchment and begins to read, his voice thin but steady as he speaks of Lord Tywin's will. Robb Stark will withdraw beyond the neck. Hostages will be exchanged. A Frey boy for a Lannister cousin. A northern ward for a southern pledge. Eddard Stark will remain at the wall, his life spared, his black cloak a standing reminder of Stark submission and royal mercy. Cersei listens without moving. She does not interrupt, does not snap the way a man might expect. Her fingers rest on the arm of her chair, nails pale against the carved lion. There is a flicker in her eyes at the word mercy, at the notion that her father would bind the throne to such a quiet compromise. She hears the cost buried in the lines, a war in the riverlands that bleeds gold and men, or a bruised northern pride that still bends the knee. Which shadow is worse? Which weakness cuts deeper? When Pycelle finishes, the silence is long enough to grow uncomfortable. It is Tyrion who breaks it. He leans forward, studying the parchment as if it were a curious beast. He does not raise his voice. He simply points out that a North humiliated but not bereaved is a different creature than the one they are making now. Kill Ned Stark, and every hearthfire from White Harbour to the Wall will tell the story of a murdered lord and king. Let him live in black, and the tale becomes quieter, threaded with doubt, with the understanding that the Starks bent for their people. He speaks of hostages as anchors, not trophies, of the way important words like father and king bind men more tightly than chains. A living Ned at the edge of the world keeps Robb careful. A dead Ned sets him free. Far to the west, in a different room thick with smoke and damp wool, Robb and Catelyn stand over the same words. The parchment lies between them like a wound. Around them, bannermen argue, voices low but fierce. To accept feels like spitting on the sacrifice Ned was prepared to make in the Sept. To refuse feels like tossing away the one advantage they still hold, a patriarch whose safety the Lannisters must now maintain with every move they make. Robb's jaw is tight. Honour pulls one way, winter hard and unbending. Strategy pulls another, colder still. Something in Jon's chest moves when he hears the offer read aloud. The image of Ned in black suddenly no longer a death, but a choice. It is Catelyn who cuts through the noise. Her voice is quiet, but it stills the room. What if, she asks, they answer Tywin with terms of their own? Sansa returned unharmed. The North left to rule itself in all but name. They will sheath their swords, but they will not crawl. Tywin Lannister, she knows, does not expect that shape of answer. The question that follows hangs over the camp like a gathering storm. What new cost will such a peace demand? And what old betrayals might never be born if they dare to pay it? The storm does not break that night. It settles instead, low and heavy over Robb Stark's camp, a pressure behind the eyes more than a roar in the ears. The council's voices fade, the tent empties, and what remains is canvas breathing in the wind, the faint crackle of a brazier, and a boy who has just been told that his father might live if he can win the right kind of peace. Grey Wind lies across the entry like a living shadow, yellow eyes half-lidded, watching the way a man watches a door he means to hold. Robb's hand moves through the thick fur at his neck with the particular care of a man placing something fragile on a table, as if the wolf might splinter under the weight of his thoughts. He does not speak. There is no one left to impress with quick answers or bold vows. Only the quiet reckoning between what he wants and what is now required. If Ned Stark is alive, what is Robb Stark meant to be? Not a king. The word has not been shouted in a Riverland hall, has not wrapped itself around him like a cloak of fire and winter and legend. He is simply the Lord of Winterfell's heir, leading men who ride beneath his banners, yet still measure his every order against the memory of another voice, another steadier hand. He feels it when they say, "My lord," and not "your grace." The way important words catch in the air and fall just short of transformation. It makes him smaller in his own mind and more exposed. A king can vanish into the story that is being told about him. A son has nowhere to hide. Every choice has a face attached to it now, and that face is Ned's. When he thinks of the phrase, of the bridge and the pale girls lined up like coin upon a table, the promise he gave no longer feels like a tool of state. To some lords, it is exactly that, an obligation that might be bent or bartered if Tywin offers better gold. But Robb clings to it with a stubbornness that surprises even him. If he breaks faith here, what will he say when his father asks him, quietly, "Why?" On the maps, battle looks clean. Arrows of ink, neat blocks of men. Out beyond the firelight, it is mud and screaming, and the sudden, senseless way a man can die because someone misjudged a ford. Robb studies the Lannister lines by candle, tracing paths he might have ridden in another life. The reckless flanking march that would have made songs if he were a crowned young wolf. Now he feels instead the imagined weight of Ned's gaze, not angry, only asking if the cost was truly needed. It makes him slower to gamble, quicker to count. He steps outside at last. The night is cold, the kind of cold that sharpens thought. South, beyond the dark rise of the trees, lies Tywin's host and the promise of terms that might free his father or break his bannerman's faith. North, beyond leagues of torn country and the wall's unseen line, something older is stirring in stories Jon used to half believe aloud. Robb stands between those directions, between generations, understanding that every move he makes now will shape the North his children inherit when Ned Stark is a name in a stone room and nothing more. Grey Wind's ears twitch. Somewhere in the darkness, a horn sounds once, low and distant. It is not an alarm, not yet, but it is the first note of a choice that will not wait forever. The horn's echo fades into the night, and far to the south another sound takes its place. The slow, uneven creak of doors in a draughty stone hall as men shuffle into Lord Walder Frey's great room at the Twins. Smoke hangs low beneath the rafters. The fire burns meanly, as if even the flames know better than to grow too bold under Walder's eye. He sits half swallowed by his high-backed chair, a bundle of furs and sharpness, listening while lesser Freys murmur the latest reports of Robb Stark's movements, of Lannister ravens, of words spoken in River Run and King's Landing that never quite reach him with the respect he believes is his due. He hears that Robb Stark has crossed and recrossed his bridge. He hears that the young wolf is not a king, only a lord's son leading his father's banners, that Ned Stark still lives in the capital as a hostage whose name carries weight in every room where honour is still a language men understand. Walder turns this over with the particular care of a man placing something fragile on a table, not because he fears breaking it, but because he wishes to see clearly how it might break. His grievances remain. He remembers Catelyn's cool courtesy, the way important words were wrapped in politeness that did not quite hide how she saw him. Necessary, inconvenient, a toll to be paid. He remembers Robb's lateness at his crossing, the slight to his pride. Yet without a crown on Robb's head, without the realm speaking of rebellion and kings and the shattering of oaths sworn centuries ago, his anger feels smaller, pettier, like a shadow thrown large on a wall by a single candle. What is the cost of betrayal when the war itself is not a song of thrones, but a harsher, quieter dispute over hostages and terms? Tywin's ravens come colder in this world. He does not speak of ending a king's war in one night of treachery. He speaks of neutrality, of looking the other way while Lannister riders slip across certain fords, of modest rewards and small, safe choices. No Lord Paramount's daughter as prize, no promise that history will remember the twins as the place where a kingdom broke. And then a different raven comes. Catelyn Stark, with Ned still breathing somewhere in the darkness of the capital, has more than desperation to offer. She rides to the twins herself, the way a man might walk back into a room where he once spoke too sharply, determined to set the words right. She does not come only with talk of marriage ties and crossings owed. She comes with the quietest, heavy promise that House Frey will be kin, not merely to a boy at war, but to the still revered Lord of Winterfell when he is ransomed home. In Walder's mind, something shifts. To strike at Robb now is not to topple a crowned enemy, but to spit in the face of a great house for a gain that feels suddenly thin. What if the twins became the place where bonds were reforged instead, where slighted pride was soothed rather than sharpened? He hesitates at the edge of infamy. The vision of a red wedding flickers before him, then gutters, its colours less vivid in a war that is no longer about breaking the realm, but about renegotiating its knots of duty and blood. In that hesitation, in that narrow space between insult and understanding, the massacre becomes only one shadow among many, not yet chosen, not yet given a name. The river runs on below his towers, indifferent, waiting for the next stone to break its surface. What if the river that runs below Harrenhal's black towers had a quieter twin in the capital, not of water, but of glances and half-heard words, carrying its own slow current of danger through every crowded room Sansa Stark must now survive? In King's Landing, the feasts feel longer. The air is thick with roasted meat, spiced wine, and the heavy perfume of people pretending not to be afraid. Sansa sits where she is told, hands folded, back straight, and she watches. She watches the way a man's jaw tightens when Lord Tywin's name is spoken, the way another laughs too quickly at Joffrey's cruelties, as if eagerness might be a shield. She does not speak unless addressed. She has learned that in this court, silence is not emptiness, it is a kind of armour. At court sessions, she studies the room instead of the throne. Who looks to Cersei before they answer? Who looks away when Joffrey's voice rises? Who dares a quiet word with Tyrion afterward in the shadow of a column? The way important words are not said begins to interest her more than the proclamations themselves. When a lord swears that the North is surely loyal, in time, she hears the distance in that last phrase, the winter hidden inside it. The ravens bring letters that smell faintly of smoke and cold. Robb writes of campfires and banners, and father's improving health. But he does not say where Ned is held, or who guards him, or what the cost of that improving health might be. Catelyn's hand is steadier, her reassurances warmer, yet her ink thins whenever she approaches the subject of terms. Sansa reads every line twice, then reads the spaces between them a third time. She begins to understand that a letter can be as much a curtain as a window. One afternoon, lost in the palace's stone intestines, she pauses beside a half-closed door. The voices inside are soft, smooth, practiced. Varys speaks of northern tempers cooling if given the proper assurances. Littlefinger answers with a dry amusement that makes her skin prickle. They do not say her name. They do not need to. A girl in the right bed, Pater murmurs, can be worth 10,000 swords. She does not hear everything. She hears enough. That night, lying awake, she traces futures in the darkness above her bed. What if Joffrey repents as Septa Mordain once promised he might? What if she is sent north instead, a peace-offering bride to some bannerman approved in a golden lion solar? What if Winterfell's grey walls rise again in her mind, only this time with a southern husband at her side and her father's seat turned into a leash? Each choice is not hers, yet each settles on her chest like a stone. Still, she clings to the image of Joffrey smiling kindly, because without it the world tilts too sharply. He can be good, she tells herself, the way a man might repeat a prayer he no longer believes, simply because stopping would make the silence unbearable. When the moon is high, she lights a single candle and takes out a scrap of parchment. The words come slowly, with the particular care of a man placing something fragile on a table, though it is only her own shaking hand that moves. "Father," she writes, and then stops, because he is not Lord Stark in this letter, not the stern figure from the stories, but the man who once lifted her onto his horse and smelled of leather and cold. She does not tell him she is afraid. She does not tell him she has started to listen the way he always did, weighing every word for its shadow. Instead, she writes, "I'm trying to be brave in the way you would understand. I am learning how they lie here. I will stay alive until you come home." She does not send it. The letter goes beneath her mattress, a quiet promise pressed between feather and board, waiting for a day when ravens might safely carry such hopes north, to a wall that feels farther away with every feast she endures. In the weeks that follow, Sansa's unsent letter lies in the dark, like a coal that never quite goes out, and far to the south another fire is carried through the city on iron-shod wheels. Tywin Lannister does not ride in like a hero. He arrives the way a man arrives to audit a failing household, with banners furled, armour plain, and his face carved into something harder than the stone of the city walls. In the throne room, the noise dies by degrees. Courtiers turn. Gold cloaks shift. Even the torches seem to burn more quietly as he walks the long strip of red carpet toward the Iron Throne. Joffrey sits high above, small in the great metal sprawl, a boy in a crown that never quite fits. His smile, when it comes, is thin and belated, the expression of someone remembering a line too late in the play. He calls his grandfather Lord Hand, with the particular care of a man placing something fragile on a table, as though the title itself might cut him. Tywin bows only as much as he must. His eyes take the measure of the room, the shadows, the whispers, the way important words have been spoken here without him. The real clash comes later, in a smaller room where the walls are closer and the fire shows every line on Tywin's face. Joffrey paces, all sharp turns and restless hands. He speaks of insult, of laughter behind fans, of how sparing Ned Stark and sending him into exile has made him look weak. He spits out Robb's name like a curse. Why should a king suffer the north to bargain? Why should he entertain ravens from a rebel son when he might have mounted the father's head on a spike? Tywin listens. He does not interrupt until the torrent runs thin. Then, in a voice that never rises, he draws the line between strength and stupidity. A dead Stark is a song for the north. A living Stark is a chain on their anger. What if the single swing of a sword in the sept had turned every northern hall into a forge for rebellion? What if mercy, wielded coldly, is the cheaper coin? Yet even as he explains, frustration coils in him. Each time Joffrey orders a beating in the yard, each time Sansa is dragged before the court and threatened, each time some hungry small folk girl is kicked aside in the street for sport, Tywin feels the cost. Every cruelty risks turning Ned's quiet exile into a legend, a rallying point spoken of in long winter rooms where men remember the way a man knelt and lived instead of dying. Cersei hovers between them, wine in hand, smile fixed. She soothes Joffrey's pride with soft words, then turns and bargains with her father in harder ones, trying to hold together a crown that is all edges. She knows she cannot afford to lose either, the boy who is king or the man who keeps the darkness from closing in. Alone later, Tywin stands at a window and watches the city lights flicker like scattered embers. Has he bought them time, or only delayed a reckoning that will come north on quiet feet? He understands, with a clarity that chills him, that he cannot master both the north and his own grandson forever, and somewhere beyond the walls, a raven lifts into the night, carrying a message that will force him to choose which shadow he fears more. Winter at Castle Black does not arrive all at once. It seeps into the stones, into the routines, into the way men hold themselves in the yard when the wind comes down from the true north. Months into Ned Stark's service, the Wall has not forgotten who he was, and is still learning who he has chosen to be. Some of the brothers call him "my lord," by habit, the title slipping out before they can stop it, then corrected with an awkward "brother" that hangs in the cold air. Some will not look at him at all, resenting the way a man who once commanded half the north now stands in the same ragged line as thieves and poachers. Others watch him in a different quiet, measuring the way he takes his turn at the mess tables, the way he mends a torn glove with his own hands, and something in their understanding shifts. Jorah Mormont sees it first, and most clearly. The old bear has never been a man for ceremony, yet there is a new gravity in the way he pauses before Ned in the common room. Maps spread between them like wounds. He speaks of ranging parties and dead villages, of tracks that vanish too quickly in fresh snow. He does not ask for counsel as a lord to a lord. He asks as a commander who has learned the cost of pride. Together they reorder the Wall's attention. Patrols are lengthened, not shortened, even as supplies run thin. The ruined forts are walked, measured, small fires lit in long abandoned rooms, simply so the ravens will see signs of life. Letters go south, drafted with the particular care of a man placing something fragile on a table. Mormont's blunt hand, Ned's precise word. Between them, they press harder on kings and councils who would rather keep their gaze on nearer shadows. In the yard, Ned's watch is narrower and more personal. Jon and Sam find themselves drawn to him in different ways. Jon stands, as he always has, straight-backed, searching his father's face for some answer to the old question of his place. Ned will not give him the lie of easy comfort. Instead, he walks Jon along the top of the wall and speaks of duty that is not lessened by bastardy, of choices that define a man more than any name ever could. Sam he meets in the library amid dust and the faint rustle of old parchment. Here the pattern interrupts. Ned Stark, who once trusted steel and good men more than ink, begins to move through shelves and scrolls like a man hunting. He asks Sam for records of the long night, for tales of the others, for any mention of the last hero that is not wrapped in children's fear. Sam's hands shake a little as he brings books down, but his voice steadies as he explains what he has found and what he cannot yet make sense of. Ned listens. The way important words settle in him is almost visible. He traces mentions of winters that lasted longer than memory, of blue-eyed shadows in the trees, of a war that ended not with victory, but with forgetting. In the rookery, with ravens shifting on their perches, he stands beneath the cold light and understands that the Wall is not a relic. It is a question that has not yet been answered. What if the true war is not the one of lions and wolves at all? What if the South is arguing over embers while a greater fire waits in the dark? He takes quill and parchment and writes to Robb and Catelyn. The letter is careful, almost bare of names, almost empty of accusation. He does not speak of White Walkers. He knows the way such words would be received. Instead, he writes of strange, dead things that do not stay dead, of omens in the forest, of an unease that runs deeper than border disputes. He asks, without quite asking, that whatever piece they carve from Lannister stone, they remember that winter is not a metaphor but a marching thing. When the raven lifts from the rookery, its wings beat against the night like a warning. Far to the south, another set of choices is already taking shape, and the wall waits, listening for an answer that may come too late. What if the wall does not simply receive Ned Stark as another worn old man in black, but as a man carrying the last unspoken truth of a dying kingdom? Night at Castle Black has a particular kind of darkness. It is not the soft dark of Winterfell's courtyards, or the civilised shadow of King's Landing's alleys, but a hard, thin cold that slips through stone and wool alike. In his narrow cell, Ned Stark sits on the rough pallet, a small bundle laid out beside him with the particular care of a man placing something fragile on a table. There is not much. A knife, dull from disuse, a strip of leather, a folded scrap of cloth worn almost to translucence, that still holds the faintest memory of blue. Once, it was part of a ribbon. Once, there was a rose. Once there was a girl in a bed that smelled of blood and crushed petals and the end of all songs. He does not touch it often. Even now, he only lets his fingers rest upon it for a heartbeat, as if the cloth might burn him. The promise he made in that tower has lived in him longer than any of his true-born children. A second spine made of silence. It has cost him his honour in the eyes of the world, his wife's easy trust, Jon's clear understanding of his own name. Now, bound to the watch, his time and his reach have narrowed to these grey walls and the cold sky above them. What if he dies here, he thinks, and the boy never knows? Jon comes to him in the evenings when duty allows, bringing the quiet with him. He stands the way he always stands, straight, controlled, hands loose at his sides, the posture of someone who has learned to take up precisely the right amount of space, never more. Tonight, there is a question in his eyes that has waited years. "Father," Jon says, and the word hangs between them, heavier than mail. "You once told me I might ask about my mother when we saw each other again. We have seen each other again." Ned feels the room tilt. He has rehearsed refusals, gentle and firm, the way a man rehearses drawing a sword he hopes never to use. He finds none of them now. Instead, he hears himself say, slowly, "She was not of the north." Something in Jon's chest moves, startled, almost fearful. "From the south, then?" "Aye." Ned's gaze drifts, unbidden, to the scrap of blue. There was a tower. There was a choice. A love that cost a kingdom its peace. He speaks of it like a man describing a fire seen from very far away, knowing its heat all the same. Jon waits. The way important words gather on Ned's tongue is not lost on him. But the name does not come. It stops, as it always has, at the edge of the promise. Later, alone, Ned thinks of ravens, of Howland Reed in his wet green fastness, the last other living soul who stood in that bloody tower, of Maester Luwin in Winterfell's quiet stone, who has always known how to weigh knowledge against danger. What if a word sent north or south now might outlive him, might reach Jon if the wall takes him as it has taken so many? Yet he sees too the realm beyond the wall's shadow, a boy king in the south, a lion lord who understands hostages and oaths, a north still raw from war. The White Walkers are no longer a story told to frighten children. They are a marching thing, and every secret feels suddenly small beside that coming winter. He goes to the Godswood because there is nowhere else to go with the weight of it. The trees here are stunted, the heart tree a pale, twisted thing, its red leaves whispering in the cold wind. He kneels before it as he did in Winterfell, though the snow beneath his knees is thinner, and the wall looms like a frozen cliff at his back. "Lyanna," he whispers, the name a white breath in the dark. "I kept my word. All these years." His hand rests on the hilt of his dagger, as if the truth were something that might yet be cut free. But the world is changing. Fire in the south, darkness in the north. Tell me, does this secret still serve anyone in a world about to burn and freeze? The heart tree does not answer. The wind moves through its branches with a sound like distant weeping or distant laughter, and Ned Stark, who has built his life upon choices already made, feels another choice forming, slow and terrible, in the quiet between heartbeats. Far to the south and east of that quiet godswood, another man stares into a different kind of darkness. On Dragonstone, the sea batters black rock, and the wind worries at the shutters of Stannis Baratheon's solar. A single candle burns low beside a clutter of charts and letters, its fire fighting a losing battle against the room's damp chill. He has read the same word 3 times now. Stark, alive, sworn. Ned Stark has taken the black. The North has not crowned a king. It has not quite bowed either. It hangs like a sword left half drawn. For Stannis, who orders the world in straight lines and lawful claims, the news does not sit cleanly. By every letter of Robert's will, by the way important words were set down and sealed, the throne is his. Joffrey is a usurper born of incest. Renly is a younger brother grasping at a crown that is not his to take. Those are simple truths, yet a living Ned Stark at the wall and a North that still speaks the king's name while keeping its distance makes the field less simple than it should be. He walks to the narrow window and looks out into the storm, as if the spray and shadow might arrange themselves into an answer. He does not admire many men. He has never pretended otherwise. But he remembers Winterfell's lord in council, the way a man who hates lying will still hold his tongue when honour demands silence instead. Stannis respects that, in his hard, ungentle way. Now that man is bound by vows Stannis himself once weighed and set aside. The wall has claimed Ned Stark, and with him the possibility of a great northern lord standing openly beside Stannis when he names Joffrey false. A moral ally, perhaps the only one whose very presence might have bent doubting lords toward understanding, is caged in black wool and ancient oaths. In the Reach, Renly Baratheon moves through bright halls heavy with flowers and music. Highgarden's rooms are warm, the air thick with soft laughter, with the rustle of silk, with Margaery Tyrell's measured smiles. Renly speaks of summer, of plenty, of a gentler king than his brother could ever be. He counts banners over wine, not over maps. He hears of the North's hesitation and almost laughs, though there is a flicker of calculation behind his eyes. A divided North is a distant problem. If they will not march for him, they are also less likely to march against him. Let them brood in their winter castles, while the South decides the game. Between these brothers, another quiet piece begins to move. Catelyn Stark, who has already walked the long, weary road of envoy once for her son, now carries a different weight. To stand before Stannis with Ned dead is to bargain from grief and fury. To stand before him with Ned living, caged but not lost, is to place a different offer on the table, with the particular care of a man placing something fragile on a table. What if she can say, "The North will come, if the true king will promise a full pardon when this war is done"? What if she can ask for Ned not as hostage, but as future hand, as the stern, steady presence beside Stannis that might keep his justice from hardening into pure stone? Stannis listens, jaw tight, eyes like flint. Honour, law, the night's watch, the cost of bending even a little, all of it grinds together behind his silence. The war that should have been a clean clash of rightful king against usurpers is becoming something else, a tangle of oaths and conditions, of regions half committed, of choices made in shadowed rooms. Somewhere between Dragonstone's storm and Winterfell's snows, the North has become a wild card, anchored to a man in black who will not be easily claimed. And as ravens beat their way through the darkening sky, carrying new words and new demands, one more message is about to be sent that will force every claimant to decide just how much Ned Stark's quiet, inconvenient honour is worth. Across the narrow sea, the words arrive thinner, worn by distance and the salt breath of months at sea. In Court first, then again in Meereen, they come in the mouths of traders and spies who have never seen a northern winter, yet speak of it with the confidence of men who have priced it and found a way to sell it. They speak of a boy king in King's Landing, all temper and golden shadow, of Stannis on his rock of smoke and fire, of Balon Greyjoy listening to the sea. They speak, almost as an afterthought, of a north that has not quite broken away because its lord lives in black. The first man says the name without care, the way a man might mention a distant harbour or a ship he once saw burning. Eddard Stark, sent to the wall instead of losing his head. He does not notice the way Daenerys goes still, the way the room tightens around that single word. In her memory, Ned Stark is her father's betrayer, the usurper's dog who held the sword when Aerys died and nearly killed her brother besides. That story was given to her early with the particular care of a man placing something fragile on a table. Viserys needed her to understand who had wronged them. Now another story arrives, layered over the first. A man who confessed to treason, and yet would not break his vows once he had taken them, who chose cold stone and lifelong exile, rather than beg further or bend again. What if the man who killed her father is also the man who would not flee his punishment? What if the single decision that seemed so small to a distant court, black cloth instead of a headsman's sword, becomes the hinge upon which her return must turn? In the reports that follow, the north sounds less shattered than the rest. There are burned villages, yes, and hard battles, but fewer smoking ruins than she expects, fewer tales of lords devouring each other. A Stark boy rides as his father's voice in the south, but Winterfell still answers, however grudgingly, to a lord whose duty runs north, not west. It is not the patchwork of desperate kingdoms she imagined conquering piece by careful piece. It is a block, a shape, a choice waiting to be made. One night, a lean Volantane with watchful eyes offers something stranger. He speaks of white shadows in the far dark, of dead men that do not stay down, of wildlings driven like leaves before a storm, all told in the same breath as the quiet rumour of Ned Stark and his bastard son standing watch in the cold. The way important words sometimes arrive, half laughed, half feared. Daenerys listens. The true war, he suggests without quite daring to say it, may not be for a throne of swords at all. Later she stands on a Meereenese balcony, the city murmuring below, her dragons cutting slow circles against a reddening sky. Westeros lies somewhere beyond that line of water and light. She imagines a northern host with banners unburned, a wall of men in black who know the darkness better than she does. Will they be the first to resist her fire, or the only ones who understand why she has come? She does not know. She only knows that when she crosses at last, the north will not be an afterthought. It will be a question that must be answered, and questions, she is learning, have their own terrible cost. What if the North learns, slowly and then all at once, to live with two centres instead of one? What if the choice is no longer between crown and submission, but between hearth and ice, between a father in black and a son in war? In practice, it begins with ravens, feathers and ink, tired maesters rubbing their eyes in Winterfell's dim rookery, the quiet scrape of quills in Castle Black's cold solar. Letters move like blood between 3 points now. Winterfell's stone heart, Robb's shifting camp in the Riverlands, and Ned's narrow room on the wall. A dispute over a border pasture in the Rills goes first to Catelyn, then up to Ned for judgment. A question of levies from the mountain clans is decided in Robb's tent before Ned's slower, more cautious reply can even arrive. The way important words lag behind the speed of horses becomes its own kind of politics. Ned feels the cost of that lag. He reads of a holdfast slow to send grain, of a minor lord hanging a poacher in a hard winter, and he does not have the power he once had to ride there himself, to look a man in the eye and listen until understanding settles. He speaks of precedent in his replies, of mercy where it can be afforded, of the need to think not only of this season's hunger but of the winters to come. Yet each word leaves his hand with the particular care of a man placing something fragile on a table he no longer owns. Beyond these rooms of ink and shadow, the small folk talk. In the taverns of White Harbour and the crofts along the Barrowlands, Ned Stark becomes, for some, a kind of living martyr, the lord who faced southern darkness and came back marked by it, still watching over them from the wall. Others mutter that a man in black is sworn away from such matters, that it is not right for a brother of the watch to weigh taxes and hangings. Most do what most people always do. They follow the nearest Stark banner, the voice that can actually change the next market day. Catelyn stands between these currents. She reads Ned's careful counsel by firelight, tracing the familiar slope of his hand, and then listens to Robb's commanders argue for speed, for harsher levies, for answers that can keep an army moving. Sometimes she folds Ned's cautions into Robb's orders so neatly that neither man can see the seam. Sometimes she sets his letter aside, face down, and tells Robb what the war, not the winter, demands. Each such choice leaves its own small shadow on her. Slowly, the North's sense of itself shifts. Once, the cry of King in the North might have gathered everything into one point. Winterfell's great hall, one man at its centre. Now there are two sacred poles in the northern mind. The hearth, where Robb's name and Sansa's quiet governance promise continuity. The wall, where Ned's exile and the old stories of darkness lend a different kind of authority. To whom does a man owe more? His warm house, or the cold line that keeps the dead things out? In the end, it is only another raven. It lifts from Winterfell's rookery at dusk, wings cutting the pale sky, carrying a message north that says, in Catelyn's measured hand, that the lords have refused southern summons, that oaths to the Iron Throne are in abeyance, until Ned Stark himself is heard. The North is not yet free, but in that thin ribbon of ink flying toward the wall, it is no longer simply a vassal either. And at Castle Black, as the bird descends, Ned feels that the next decision will not belong to him alone. The raven from the wall is only one bird among many. Others wheel lower, over trampled fields, over tents like a forest of dull canvas, over a river that runs thick with mud and the faint metallic taste of old blood. The war has not stopped for Ned Stark's survival. It has only changed its shape. On the south bank of the Red Fork, dawn comes up grey and grudging, a thin light seeping through river mist and campfire smoke. Men wake to the smell of wet wool, boiled oats, and the iron tang of oiled mail. Horses stamp and snort in the darkness before the sun, feeling the tension the way a man feels a storm in his bones. Somewhere, a boy retches quietly behind a cart. Somewhere else, a septon whispers a word over a line of kneeling men, naming each face, each soul, as if that will keep them from the stranger. This is not the Blackwater. In another telling, green fire would bloom on Blackwater and make monsters out of men. Here, Tywin has chosen the Riverlands instead, chosen Earth he understands, where numbers and patience matter more than wildfire and kings. He studies the map in his tent with the particular care of a man placing something fragile on a table. The North, the Trident, the Capital, the Wall, each is a weight on the board, but one weight matters more. He does not speak of it to his captains. He does not say Ned Stark's name. He thinks, instead of Sansa in the capital, of Arya vanished into the city's shadow, of the quiet, stubborn letters coming down from Winterfell in Catelyn's hand. To break Robb Stark utterly is to make those letters harder, colder, to make the North a country that cannot be called back. Better, for now, to bloody the wolf and let him limp home, with his pride dented and his banners still mostly intact. Across the river, Robb sits his horse on a low rise, watching the Lannister lines form and reform in the mist. Jon is at his right hand, hood up against the chill, eyes moving from left flank to right, counting banners, measuring distances the way important words are measured before they are spoken. Robb knows, with a clarity that aches, that his father is alive in a tower cell far to the south, that every choice he makes here will echo into that room. What is the cost of a charge that might make him a song and leave the North without its lord? What is the worth of caution when men are already dead because he crossed this river at all? Something in Jon's chest moves when he hears Robb give the first orders. Not in a shout, but in a level voice that carries along the line. No reckless gallop this time. No sudden brilliant feint that leaves him half a field ahead of his guard. The young king holds back his reserve, keeps his horse near the centre, sends other men to test the Lannister line. He remembers the way a man looked on a bier in Winterfell's Godswood, the way winter air made the candles gutter, and he refuses to make that image truth again. The battle itself is a series of almosts, a northern flank that begins to fold when Lannister spearmen find a shallow in the river, only for Robb to pull back a third of his line, rather than commit the last of his horse. A Lannister charge that might have broken through to Robb's banner if Tywin had not called the trumpets early, unwilling to risk his centre on one more push. Dust, shouting, the dull thunder of hoofbeats, then long ragged hours of men locking shields and breaking apart again. The Red Fork runs brown with churned earth and thin threads of red. By mid-afternoon, both armies are still standing, both banners still flying, though lower, as if tired. Tywin sits his horse and watches the smoke drift, calculating. He could press, he could gamble. He speaks of pursuit, but only to dismiss it. Robb, in his own tent, fingers a quill, the leather of his gauntlets creaking softly as he removes them, one by one. Letters, not eulogies, will be written tonight. Outside, the men mutter about victory or defeat, as if the day must be one or the other. Inside, two commanders choose a third thing: to live, to write, to leave the war unresolved. The field is theirs and not theirs. The choice is theirs and not theirs. And as the ravens are readied, as ink is ground and sand prepared, one more message is drafted, its destination neither capital nor camp, but a cold stone wall where Ned Stark waits to learn what price mercy truly carries. The ravens go out into a winter that has not yet reached the capital, and yet, by the time the news reaches King's Landing, the city already feels cold. The rot begins quietly. It is in the way bread lines lengthen outside the bakeries along the Street of Flour, in the way a man who once bowed with a jest on his lips now keeps his eyes on the cobbles. The war does not move, not truly. Stalemates in the Riverlands mean caravans delayed, harvests burned, levies kept from their fields. Grain grows scarce, tempers grow shorter. Joffrey sits the Iron Throne as if it were a game board he is half grown bored of, and yet his boredom is dangerous. He has been denied the grand theatre of Ned Stark's public death, denied the clean, sharp story he wanted the city to learn in a single stroke of the sword. He does not forget the humiliation of being overruled. It curdles in him instead, searching for smaller stages. So the Crown's justice becomes a series of little storms. A gold cloak fails to move quickly enough when the king's litter turns a corner. Joffrey orders him flogged in the yard, not to death. No, only until the man cannot stand. A butcher's boy looks up too long when the royal party rides past on a hunt. Later, an arrow meant for a hare goes wide, and the boy's mother is given a purse of coins with the particular care of a man placing something fragile on a table, as if the right weight of silver could quiet the way important words spread through a market. He does not sign decrees of mass punishment. Tywin has made that cost clear. Instead, Joffrey learns a different pleasure: precision. A merchant who complained too loudly about spoiled grain is found beaten in an alley, his face a ruin, his hands untouched so he may still work. A serving girl spills wine on the king's sleeve. She is stripped and paraded in a servants' hall where no lord will see, then sent away with bruises where a grandfather in the West will never be forced to notice. Sansa watches this new pattern form, like frost along a window's edge. In the throne room, before the court, Joffrey is almost careful. He mocks her gown, her northern words, the stiffness of her curtsies, but his fingers never quite tighten on her arm hard enough to leave a mark. He speaks of her father's supposed treasons with a bright, cruel delight, but when he has her kneel and kiss the cold steel of his sword, there are guards close enough, eyes on them, to keep his hand light. The darkness gathers in the spaces between. Later, in corridors where the torches smoke and the stone sweats with heat, he has her stand for an hour, 2, correcting every answer until her voice goes hoarse. Once, he has Sir Meryn raise a hand, then lowers it again with a thin smile, as if discovering that restraint can itself be a blade. Outside, the city hears fragments. A baker's apprentice vanishes after laughing at the wrong jest. A tanner's daughter limps home from the castle kitchens. Each story is small, deniable, the sort of thing a hand can smooth with coin and quiet words. Tyrion finds himself sending purses into the city like buckets of water into a building already smouldering, knowing the fire is not in the rafters yet, but in the walls. Cersei too stalks from room to room, arranging apologies, threatening gossips, reminding her son that a king must be loved as well as feared, and hearing in his answering silence that he has understood only one of those words. What if the realm's danger is not a single mad choice, but 100 petty ones? What if the boy who was stopped from killing once simply learns to kill more slowly? In the Great Hall, on a day like any other, Sansa stands beside the Queen as petitioners shuffle forward. Joffrey sprawls on the throne, one hand on the hilt of his sword, idly tracing the lion worked into the pommel. The light from the high windows catches on his hair, on the steel, on the dust motes turning in the air, and for a moment the whole room feels held in that thin, bright line between stillness and violence. She studies him from across the distance that protocol demands. The way he leans forward when a man stumbles over his plea. The way his eyes light not at tales of victory, but at the mention of suffering. She thinks of her father alive yet far away, of Robb somewhere in the Riverlands, of Jon at the wall, of all the fragile threads that still bind her world together. And she understands, with a clarity that makes her feel suddenly older than her years, that even if he never lifts a sword himself again, this boy can still cut through every one of those threads. Not with one blow in a crowded square, but with one cruelty at a time, each as quiet and sharp as a whispered word in a darkened room. What if the girl who slips from the crowd at Baela's sept does not become a creature made only of flight and fury, but a child moving through war with one stubborn, impossible conviction? Her father is still waiting for her at the end of the road. The Riverlands still burn. Yoren still drags his ragged line of recruits north, the way a man might drag a broken cart through deep mud, because there is nothing else to be done. The gold cloaks still find them. Steel still flashes in the dark. Arya still dives into the trees with the taste of fear and horse on her tongue. Yet beneath the terror, there is a quiet, insistent thought that does not leave her. The wall. Father. If she can only keep moving, she will reach them both. Harrenhal is no kinder for that hope. The stone is still blackened, the sky above it still feels too large, and men still die in ways that leave a stain on the air. But her days there are different in their centre of gravity. She listens. She listens the way important words are listened to in a cold hall, when the fire is low and everyone understands that what is said now will have a cost later. She hoards rumours of the north, of a stern lord from Winterfell still held in King's Landing, of Lannister riders sent toward the neck, of ravens winging toward the wall. She does not think of herself as alone. Not yet. Among outlaws, if she falls in with them, as in the old story, that same thread holds. The Brotherhood without banners speak of kings and justice and the small folk's hunger. She speaks of the road north, of the castles along the way, of the Black Brothers at the wall who must surely open their gate to Eddard Stark's daughter, if only she can reach them. There is a kind of quiet irony in it. They are trying to pull the realm apart into pieces of vengeance and redress, and she is trying, stubbornly, to stitch one small line through the darkness toward a single man. The coin from Jaqen H'ghar still lies against her skin, cold as winter water when she touches it at night. Bravos. A ship. A different life. In another telling, the choice is clean because there is nothing left to lose. Here, Every time her fingers close around the metal, she feels as though she is lifting her father from the table and setting him aside, with the particular care of a man placing something fragile on a table and then walking away from it forever. What if she does not? What if, when the chance comes to turn east toward a port, she turns her feet north instead? The Riverlands are a maze of broken villages and half-burnt woods. But she knows how to move as a shadow now. With the Brotherhood longer, she might become their scout on the roads toward the Neck, the small, silent ghost who slips ahead of the banners and brings back word of Lannister patrols, of Frey crossings, of the way the war is slowly strangling every path that might lead to the wall. In that life, she learns patience before she learns oblivion. She learns the cost of every choice in blood and missed chances. Each village bypassed is a ship not taken. Each mile north is a step away from the strange, terrible understanding the faceless men might offer her. So there comes a night, whether on a hill above a crossroads inn or at the edge of some nameless ford, when she must stop. One road curls east, toward salt on the air and Bravos beyond it, toward becoming no one and setting aside Arya Stark like an old, torn cloak. The other runs north, thinner now, choked by war, but still somehow there. If she follows it, she remains Arya a little longer. Long enough, perhaps, to stand in the same room as her father again, and see what the years and the war have carved into him. She stands there, breathing the cold, hearing the distant crackle of distant fires, and understands that whichever path she takes will not only decide the shape of her own shadow, but the shape of the war that is still unfolding around men who do not yet know her name. She cannot walk both roads. She has to choose. Winter answers her choice before she can. It comes not as a blizzard, not yet, but as a thin, cutting cold that settles over the wall like a held breath. The kind of cold that feels less like weather and more like something watching. The ranging begins in that quiet. Jon rides at Ned's side, ghost padding white and silent through the drifts, a line of black cloaks threading into the haunted forest. The trees are wrong. Frost feathers the bark in patterns too delicate, too deliberate, as if some careful hand has traced them in the dark. Sound dies quickly here. Even the horses' breaths seem muffled, swallowed by a stillness that is not peace. They find the first body near dusk, a wildling, or what had been one, half buried in snow, skin pale as candle wax, eyes open to a sky the colour of old iron. The way a man freezes should be simple, stiff, brittle, rhymed with frost. This is not simple. The flesh looks almost soft, almost new, as if death has circled back on itself and started again. When the blue seeps into the eyes, it happens without warning. One moment they are dull, empty things. The next they are lit from within by a cold, inhuman clarity. The corpse moves, fingers curl, snow falls from its chest as it rises, joint by joint, with the particular care of a man placing something fragile on a table. Steel rings, ghost snarls. Jon's sword shivers in his hand as he meets a strength that does not feel like strength at all, but like absence given form. Ned is there, blade already in motion, the old instincts waking as if they had only been sleeping beneath the years in King's Landing. He does not shout. He does not waste breath on fear. He moves the way a man moves who has seen battle enough to understand that there is no room now for disbelief. Fire ends it. It always has. It always will, if men remember in time. Back in the Lord Commander's room, the heat of the brazier feels thin, insufficient against the memory of that touch. Ned stands over the map of the wall, shadows from the candles cutting hard lines into his face. For the first time in years, his sense of war has nothing to do with sigils or succession. He speaks of distances, of supply, of how long men can last when the enemy does not care whose banner flies above a gate. Ravens go out. To King's Landing, where Cersei reads the word others and tastes opportunity more than danger. To Winterfell, where Robb measures the letter against his father's old stories and the new grinding cost of holding a restless north. To Dragonstone, where Stannis' jaw tightens as he considers whether this is truth, or some northern ploy to drag him into another man's war. The way important words travel is never simple. In the south, they are weighed, doubted, repurposed. Joffrey laughs. The small council argues over whether this is exaggeration or leverage or both. Stannis folds the parchment with slow, suspicious care, already wondering who lies. Even in Winterfell, where Jon's hand has penned some of the lines, there is a moment's hesitation. Can Winter itself be this deliberate an enemy? At Castle Black, the irony settles over Ned like another cloak. Tywin Lannister, in his distant, ruthless prudence, has trapped him here. A vow of non-interference, a carefully negotiated neutrality, now binds one of the few men who truly understands what moves in the darkness beyond the wall. The realm he might have guided is deaf, and he has sworn to be quiet. Jon stands beside him at the Lord Commander's table, maps spread like wounds. Something in Jon's chest moves as he traces with one gloved finger the long white line of the wall, then the lands beyond, then the soft underbelly of the south that will not listen. If the realm will not unite for honour or law, Ned says, it may yet unite for survival. But what if it refuses even that? What if the single decision that seems so small, one lord's choice to spare one northern head, becomes the hinge on which the world fails to turn? Ned's hand closes on the map, crumpling a thin strip of parchment coastline. He looks at Jon, at the boy who is no longer only a boy, and the understanding passes between them without need of any word at all. If the south will not come to the wall, then the wall may have to go to the south. The question that hangs in the cold air is simple. How? And what will it cost them to force a realm of deaf men to hear? The answer for a long while is that no one truly knows. From a height, the realm looks almost unchanged. The same mountains, the same rivers, the same long grey spine of the wall. Yet every line of power has blurred. In the north, Robb rides not as a crowned wolf, but as a son holding his father's place. A commander whose banners still carry the stag and lion of a king he does not trust. The words king in the north are spoken in tents and taprooms, but always in a lowered voice, the way important words are tested on the tongue before they are offered to the room. He does not claim them, not while Ned Stark still breathes in King's Landing and sends careful letters north, each one folded with the particular care of a man placing something fragile on a table. So the north is not quite independent, yet no longer simply obedient. A shadow realm, half turned away. To the south and east, the riverlands bear the marks of a war that never finishes its own sentences. Villages along the Red Fork burn, are reclaimed, are burned again. Men swear to one king at dawn and another at dusk, because the latest rider to pass through has the larger company of spears. There is no red wedding to break a northern host in a single night of treachery. There is no single blow that teaches the river lords despair. Instead, there is a slow grinding, a chipping away of stores and sons and faith. In the Reach and the Stormlands, the split is quieter but no less deep. Renly's banners have fallen, yet his memory has not. Some lords still drink to his ghost in private, speaking of the king who smiled, while others bend the knee to Stannis and his hard, narrow understanding of law and fire. What if there had been one clear victor on the Blackwater? What if one crown had emerged undeniable? Instead, victories are partial, truces are temporary, and every lord keeps a second set of plans folded away. The small folk move through this half-war like reeds in a shifting current. A woman in the Reach wakes to find her village flying a stag, sleeps, and wakes again beneath a lion. And after a time she stops asking which name to curse. Children in the Riverlands learn the faces of 4-5 different kings before they learn their letters. The way a man chooses which story to tell his son at night becomes a political act. Somewhere in all of this, Tywin Lannister's name changes shape. He is still feared, still spoken of as the man who ended one rebellion at the Trident and another at the Sack. Yet now he is also the quiet architect of a war that never quite ends. The lord whose single act of mercy in sparing Ned Stark's head has denied his house the terrible clarity that came, in another telling, with a wedding drenched in blood. Something in Jon's chest moves when he hears old men in the camp say that this is the price of cleverness, that a clean kill would have been kinder. The pattern interrupts itself in the far north. Ravens from the wall grow more urgent. Tracks in the snow are not made by deer. Fires are seen where no camp should be. While the south argues over lines on a map, winter thickens its grip on the stones of Castle Black, and the true enemy gathers in the darkness beyond, patient, listening, waiting for a realm too tired of war to lift its eyes. What if, on that same wall where ravens scream of things in the dark, Jon Snow is not left to become a commander alone? What if the single decision that seemed so small, Tywin's insistence that Eddard Stark live, becomes the hinge upon which Jon's whole becoming turns? The courtyard at Castle Black is the same hard-packed snow and cold stone, the same grey brothers moving through their duties, but Jon's education bends along a different line. Ned rides north under guard, not as a condemned traitor, but as a hostage of consequence. And in the long, watchful months that follow, he does what he has always done. He teaches. He speaks of lordship the way a man speaks of an old wound, quietly and without ornament, laying out for Jon the cost of command in a room that smells of tallow and wet wool rather than Winterfell's cedar smoke. Jon still learns the drill yard lessons of rank and ration, of how to place men along a wall in a storm, yet now those lessons are threaded with a deeper understanding of the politics of oaths. Ned does not romanticize the Black Cloak. He does not lie about what vows can and cannot hold when kings fall and realms fracture. He talks Jon through the way important words are twisted in King's Landing, how honour can become a weapon in another man's hand, how the Watch will need more than old stories when winter truly comes. In canon, Jon's leadership is forged in a sharper solitude, Jeor Mormont's brief guidance, then the sudden emptiness of command, the way a man is pushed forward because there is simply no one else. Here, he has a father to argue with, to disappoint, to emulate. When Jon proposes arranging, Ned questions every assumption, turns each choice like a blade under the light. When Jon flares in anger at the small-minded or the cruel, Ned's quiet, steady disapproval cuts deeper than any shouted rebuke, forcing Jon to make his independence a deliberate act rather than an accident of crisis. This changes the wildlings most of all. When word of Mance Rayder reaches Castle Black, Ned does not speak of savages. He speaks of bannermen who walked away, of men who chose freedom over kneeling. Jon approaches Mance and Tormund with a different mix of caution and openness, seeing in them not only raiders, but the raw material of allies against the others. If his father, who once hunted deserters, can imagine parley across the ice, why should he not? And beneath it all, another lesson coils. Ned, older now, marked by dungeons and almost death, begins to circle the truth of Jon's birth with the particular care of a man placing something fragile on a table. He does not name Rhaegar. He does not name Lyanna, but he speaks of promises, of snow and dragonfire, of how a name can be both shield and shackle. Something in Jon's chest moves at these half-words. His sense of himself as snow begins to flicker at the edges, complicated by a possibility he cannot yet name. What happens to a Night's Watch vow when the man who swore it suspects that he was born for something larger than the wall? What happens when that suspicion is not a lonely, guilty thought, but a shadow Ned Stark quietly acknowledges with his eyes, if not his tongue? One night, Jon stands atop the wall where the ice meets the sky, the wind cutting through wool and leather, the torches below no more than scattered embers. To his left, the long line of the wall curves away into a darkness that promises only duty, cold, and the slow, grinding satisfaction of keeping a failing realm alive 1 year more. To his right, the world falls toward the south, toward the politics Ned has described, toward the Iron Throne that once ordered his father's death and then his reprieve, toward tales of a Targaryen girl across the sea with 3 living dragons and a will like sharpened steel. He can almost feel the paths beneath his boots. One leads deeper into his vows, into command at Castle Black, into a life measured in patrols and hard choices made in snow. The other is less clear, a road of rumour and prophecy, of banners and crowns, and the kind of fire that burns whole kingdoms clean. Somewhere far beyond his sight, Daenerys Targaryen moves across a red sky, and the decisions Jon makes on this wall will determine whether their stories ever touch. For now, he stands between them, breath a pale ghost in the night, knowing at last that winter is not the only thing coming for him. Winter is no longer a word in old stories for Tywin Lannister. It arrives in ink and broken seals, in the cramped hands of northern maesters, describing blue-eyed corpses that do not stay down, villages found as if a quiet darkness had passed through and taken the warmth with it. He reads the first report in his solar and dismisses it as fear. He does not dismiss the fifth. The room is as it has always been. Fire banked low, shelves lined with ledgers, the great lion banner folded rather than flying. Yet something in the air has shifted, the way a man notices the taste of metal before a storm. Tywin sits longer these nights, the parchment close to the candles, his eyes moving slowly, returning again and again to the same phrases. Walking dead, no tracks in fresh snow, swords that shatter like glass. He tries at first to fit it into the pattern he understands. Raiders beyond the wall, perhaps, or northern lords dressing up their weakness in tales of monsters to pry gold from the south. He speaks of grain stores, of new towers along the King's Road, of how many men can be spared without weakening the marches. He calculates, because calculation is the only language he has ever trusted. But the numbers do not answer the thing described. What is the cost of an enemy that does not eat, does not sleep, does not break when banners fall? What use is a hostage when the threat comes not from a rival house, but from the snow itself? The way important words begin to lose their edges in his mind, loyalty, victory, punishment, unsettles him more than he will allow anyone to see. At council, his voice is as controlled as ever. He lays out, with the particular care of a man placing something fragile on a table, a proposal to send men, coin, and supplies to the Night's Watch in numbers not seen for a century. The lords around him shift, frown, glance at one another. They speak of Daenerys across the narrow sea, of restless bannermen, of the insult of arming crows while their own borders feel thin. One asks very softly whether the North has not always exaggerated its winter. Tywin listens, and in their objections he hears the echo of his own earlier disbelief. He does not like the sound. For the first time in many years, he considers writing a letter whose every line would taste of swallowed pride. A raven to Winterfell, not to the boy king in the north, but to Ned Stark, the man he once chose not to kill. What if the single decision that seems so small in that hot, crowded throne room has become the hinge upon which everything else turns? He stands before the great map of Westeros when the council has gone, the candlelight throwing his shadow long across the painted rivers and mountains. His fingers rest, almost despite themselves, on the wall. Beyond it, only blank wood and the idea of endless snow. He understands, with a clarity that feels like cold water, that he has spent his life preparing for the wrong war, and that the one man he spared may now hold the key to saving the house he bled to build. The Raven is not yet written, the choice has not yet been made. Somewhere in the dark between Lannisport and Winterfell, the future waits to see whether the lion can bend before winter truly falls. The answer comes in ice, not ink. Long before Tywin's raven can find Winterfell, the dead find the wall. The first sound is not a horn, but a pressure, a kind of muffled roaring that is not quite wind and not quite sea, rising out of the darkness beyond the gate. Men on the outer steps slow, then stop. Torches gutter. The night itself seems to lean against the timbers. And then the eyes appear. Hundreds of small cold blue fires winking into being along the tree line, the way a man might light candles in a silent hall. Jon is on the parapet when it happens, breath smoking, fingers numb around the hilt of his sword. Below, the mass of dead presses forward, bodies moving with that terrible, patient unity, hands and broken tools and rusted blades scraping at ice and stone. He calls for the archers to loose, voice hoarse, and the first volley hisses down, fire arrows stitching a brief frantic pattern of light over the black snow. Beside him, Ned Stark moves more slowly, but not from fear. He has learned the cost of panic. He walks the wall with the particular care of a man placing something fragile on a table, setting men where they must stand, shifting barrels of pitch, sending the greenest brothers down from the worst of the fighting. He does not waste a word. When he speaks, it is to name a man, to point, to make a choice that may keep that man breathing until dawn. And yet, even as he works, the understanding grows in him like frost. The watch is stronger than it was when he first rode through the gate. Better armed, better drilled, less drunk, less complacent. But it is not enough. The dead keep coming. The stores are thin. The ravens he has sent south, marked urgent in his own cramped hand, have gone into silence or delay. Kings and lords are still arguing over crowns while winter climbs their last wall. On a quiet turn of the parapet, Jon falls in beside him. They do not look at one another. There is no room for that. There is only the roar below, the crack of bowstrings, the smell of burned flesh and cold. What if they do not answer? Jon asks. The question is soft, but it lands with the weight of a hammer. Ned has asked himself the same thing in his own head, in his own father's voice, 100 times. What if the letter never arrives? What if the single decision that seemed so small, one lord's mercy in a southern city, becomes the hinge upon which everything else turns, and still the realm will not look north? His vows say he belongs to the wall. His blood says he belongs to the north. He can feel both truths pulling at him, one like iron, one like bone. As Lord Eddard Stark, he would have called the banners, filled every room in Winterfell with men and maps and fire. As a brother, he is meant to bar the gate and send only words. He hears again the way important words sounded in his father's hall. Duty, honour, obedience. And knows with a tired, bitter clarity that obedience may doom them now. So he stops walking. That is the pattern interrupt. That is the thing Jon notices. In the middle of the storm, Ned simply stands still. You will ride south, he says at last. Jon turns, startled despite himself. I am of the watch. You are my son in all but name, Ned answers, and the word son hangs between them like visible breath. And the realm will not ignore you, not if you ride with my seal and the truth. Go to Winterfell, to Robb, to any man who will listen. Tell them what you have seen. It is open defiance. It is also the only path he can see. The way a man chooses when every other road is already buried in snow. Something in Jon's chest moves, a painful, reluctant understanding. To leave now is to abandon the line. To stay is to let the north sleep through the end of the world. He bows his head once. As you command. Later, hours or days, time has become a blur of darkness and pale blue light. Ned stands alone atop the wall. His hands are cracked and bleeding in his gloves. His face burns with the dull ache of frostbite. Below, the dead still press and burn and fall. Above, the stars are thin and far. He looks south, past the endless white, toward a home he may never see again. If one Lannister mercy began this, he whispers into the wind, let one Stark disobedience be enough to end it. He does not know whether he has saved them, or only doomed them more slowly. He only knows that the choice is made, and somewhere between Castle Black and Winterfell, the future is riding hard. What if the horse carrying that future finally slows, not at King's Landing or Castle Black, but beneath the grey walls of Winterfell where the living have gathered to speak of the dead? The great hall is colder than it should be. Braziers burn low, a thin, stubborn fire fighting the vastness of the room, and every banner seems to hang a little heavier, as if even painted sigils can feel the weight of winter pressing close. The Wolf of Stark, the Lion of Lannister, the direwolf stitched by Sansa's own hand for Jon's household, and, newest, strangest of all, the three-headed dragon of a queen who has not yet set foot this far north. Jon stands at the end of the table, not at its head. The choice is deliberate. Sansa sits in the high seat, her back straight, her hair braided with the quiet precision of a woman who has learned that presentation is a language. She watches the room the way a man studies a battlefield map, tracing lines of old grievance and new necessity between each face. Ned is not here. His absence is its own presence. Somewhere on the wall, or in the cold fortresses that cling to it, he is reading reports inked in a cramped northern hand, sending back letters whose words are measured with the particular care of a man placing something fragile on a table. He does not thunder commands. He writes of weather, of sightings in the woods, of brothers lost. He speaks of the dead as if they are already marching. His name moves through the room like a second fire. Lord Manderley remembers the man who bled for Robert's rebellion. The Lannister envoy, a lean cousin sent north now that Tywin's power has thinned and scattered, remembers the lord who might have been a hostage and instead became a warning about the cost of Joffrey's temper. Even the foreign men in pale leathers. Daenerys Targaryen's advance emissaries have heard the stories. The Stark, who would not bend, and yet did not break the realm when he could have. Tywin's death in his bed, years earlier than in another telling, has left his house cautious rather than triumphant. No red wedding, no northern oaths drowned in wine and blood, only a long, grinding half-war that has taught the lions the way important words like alliance and truce can mean survival rather than shame. The envoy's voice is careful when he offers grain, coin, ships, in exchange for a place in whatever new order survives the darkness beyond the wall. Something in Jon's chest moves when the dragon emissary speaks. She talks of her queen's 3 living dragons, of Astapor's red streets, of chains broken and cities burned. But when she looks at the crude charcoal sketch of the wall, her voice lowers. What is the point of conquest if there is no realm left to rule? They do not yet speak the truth of Jon's blood aloud, though Sam's letters and Bran's visions have already reached them. That revelation waits at the edge of the room like another shadow, promising to turn every alliance on its head. For now, Sansa's hand rests near his on the table, steadying him, anchoring him to the here and now rather than the storm of names that might come. At last, the talk of hostages and castles, of crowns and styles, falters. The map is cleared. In its place, Jon spreads a rough drawing of the wall and the land beyond, ink blotted where his hand shook in the cold. No sigils, no carved lions or crowned stags, only jagged lines of ice, arrows pointing south, small marks where villages have gone silent. In the hush that follows, the room seems to narrow around that single sheet of parchment. Old grudges hang back in the shadows. Winter is no longer a word in a house motto. It is a line on a table, moving. And for the first time, the lords and ladies of Westeros lean forward together, not to claim, but to understand what must be given up if any of them are to see another spring. Silence lingers over that table long after the parchment stops moving. In that quiet, the shape of the world can be traced back to a different room, a different word, a different choice. A raven from Harrenhal, Tywin Lannister's hand closing, not around a sword, but around a command to stay it. From that single interruption, the lines diverge. Ned Stark does not die on the steps of the Great Sept. He rides north in chains and lives in stone and snow, sworn to black, his honour bent but not broken. Robb never hears the cry for a king in the north, never feels the strange fire of a crown placed upon his dark curls. The red wedding becomes a whisper of a plan never quite justified, a bitterness Walder Frey must swallow rather than serve. Sansa is not a lamb trapped at court, but a daughter kept closer to Winterfell's godswood. While Arya's flight is shorter, her path shaped by near loss rather than the absolute severing of a beheading in the sun. The human gains are real, if uneven. Fewer halls run red in sudden treacherous feasts. The trident does not choke on quite so many corpses. The north pulls away from the Iron Throne more slowly, sinews stretching rather than snapping, so that old loyalties fray instead of tearing in one night of music and knives. At the wall, a quiet man with a ruined leg and a name that still carries weight walks the yards and the tunnels, and the Night's Watch stands a little straighter under his eye. Jon Snow learns the shape of duty not from a memory in a statue, but from his father's living corrections. The way a man will adjust a son's grip on a sword hilt with the particular care of a man placing something fragile on a table. Yet the new sufferings are real as well. Without the sharp shock of a public martyrdom, the war does not burn hot and brief, it smoulders. Small folk watch their fields trampled again and again, never sure which banner will pass next. Cersei, Robb, Stannis, Renly, each clings to half victories and half defeats, and the realm's gaze remains fixed on crowns while the true winter gathers beyond the wall. Messages about dead men walking are received, weighed, and set aside. No one is free enough or desperate enough to redefine what matters. At the centre of it stands Tywin. He speaks of order, of hostages and marriages, of avoiding folly. He does not speak of mercy. His choice to spare Ned is born of calculation, of the way important words like leverage and precedent sound in his own mind. Does preventing the Red Wedding's butchery, blunting the Stark rebellion and keeping the realm stitched, however roughly, make him a hidden saviour, or only a colder kind of villain whose shadow happens for a moment to fall where it shields rather than sears? And so we return in memory to the sept of Baelor, to the sword that never falls, to the crowd that never gasps, to the king whose tantrum is checked by a raven and a grandfather's will. Was the world made better in that instant, or merely bent along a different, unknowable curve? Before the story answers, another raven is already on the wing, and its destination will decide whether that stayed sword was a blessing, or the first quiet mistake. History does not turn on a speech in the throne room or a duel in the yard. It turns here on an old man at Harrenhal, irritated by a boy king's tantrums, dictating a single, sharp command to a maester who will never know its full weight. Keep Eddard Stark alive. He does not speak of mercy when he gives that order. He speaks of leverage, of hostages and marriages, of the way a man can break a kingdom with one foolish execution. The ink dries with the particular care of a man placing something fragile on a table, not because he loves it, but because it is useful. And yet that cold calculation moves like quiet fire through the lives of people who will never see Tywin Lannister's face. For Ned, the cost of that command is not paid in the moment the sword is stayed, but in every moment after, when duty and mercy begin to pull in opposite directions. In the black cells he had prepared himself for darkness without end, for a clean ending. Now he must live. Now he must choose to live for his daughters, to swallow his name and confess to treason so that Sansa might be spared, to accept the wall as a sentence and, in time, as a vow freely renewed. What does it mean then, when the dead man walking becomes the one who later breaks? When the Lord Commander, who once bent his proud head in a southern court, chooses to bend his vows as well, opening the gates to wildlings, sending ravens south, placing the living above the letter of an oath spoken long ago in a different room, under a different sky. Around him, identities shift on that same small hinge. Sansa's awakening comes more slowly, without the brutal severing of a public beheading, but it comes all the same. In the way important words from her father change over time, from comforting stories into hard, quiet instructions about how power dresses itself. Arya's road is less feral, more haunted, her list always in tension with the possibility of reunion, with the knowledge that somewhere her father breathes and might yet see what his little girl has become. Jon too stands in that shadowed space between names. Bastard. Brother. Something more. Something in Jon's chest moves each time he thinks of the choice that kept Ned alive in King's Landing and sent him north instead, as if his whole life is an echo of a raven's flight he never witnessed. and at the centre of it, Tywin. Not redeemed, not softened, only a reminder that the way a man like him orders the world can, from certain angles, resemble grace. A spared life, a war delayed, a winter faced with more Starks still breathing. But to build a realm on such accidents, on the hope that cold men will occasionally choose useful mercy over ruin, is to trust in shadows. In the end, the question is not only what if he had chosen differently, it is what each of them does with the world that single, irritated choice has left them. Flawed, partial, unexpectedly merciful in places, and still moving, always, toward the next decision that will not feel important until it is far too late to take it back. So now the room is set, the shadows are long, and the quill is still in his hand. What if you were the lion at Harrenhal, not watching from a safe, clean distance, but sitting exactly where he sits, the war table crowded with markers, the air thick with the smell of smoke and parchment, a boy king's foolishness already echoing down the raven roots. The word has come, Eddard Stark is condemned, and in this quiet, before the reply is written, the choice is yours. Do you stay the sword? You know what it will cost. A living Ned Stark means no sudden, righteous fire in the north, no banners called in the same sharp, unanimous answer. The war that follows is slower, more negotiated, its injuries spread out over years instead of concentrated in one bright, terrible wound. Fewer songs, fewer clean lines between innocence and guilt, more hostages, more uneasy truces, more children learning. The way a man learns to live with an old break in the bone, to move carefully around the pain instead of tearing it out in a single scream. Is that better? You have seen what the canon choice gave them. Robb crowned in a crowded hall, the young wolf riding from victory to victory until the red wedding swallows him whole. Arya scattered into darkness and strange gods. Sansa's understanding of the world shattered in a single afternoon on the steps of the Sept. In this other winter you are weighing, would you trade the horror of that feast for a world where Robb never becomes a legend, only a dutiful son at his father's side, where Sansa wakes more slowly, under guidance instead of shock, where Arya's path to the faceless men is no longer certain, perhaps no longer necessary? He does not think in these terms. This man at Harrenhal, he speaks of leverage, of hostages, of the way important words like peace and loyalty can be bent to serve a house rather than a realm. But you are not bound to his measures. When you imagine your hand moving, with the particular care of a man placing something fragile on a table, to sign the order that keeps Ned alive, does Tywin Lannister, in your eyes, become something more complicated? Does this single act nudge him toward a dark, reluctant heroism? Or does his motive keep him where he has always stood for you, a villain for whom any good deed is only an accident of calculation? Which Westeros calls to you more, the sharp break we know, or this quieter, longer wound? Tell me in the comments which world feels more just, or at least more honest about the cost of power, and what other small hinges you would turn if you could press your finger for a moment against the wheel. Because this is only one door we have opened, there are others waiting just beyond the next shadow. So we step back for a moment from that door and look at the rooms we have walked through together. We began in the blinding light of the Great Sept, with a sword raised and a crowd holding its breath, with Ned Stark on his knees and the world narrowing to the space between a boy king's whim and an old man's neck. We watched that moment shudder and change, not with a roar, but with a raven, a sealed word from Harrenhal, the way important words can cross a continent and still arrive in time to stay a hand. From there, the story moved into quieter chambers. A father in chains, measuring every silence in his cell. A son in the Riverlands, no longer the young wolf born of sudden grief, but a commander who must obey a living father's strategy. Sansa in her high tower, no longer only a hostage, but a bargaining piece whose value Tywin weighs the way a man weighs gold and grain. Arya in the dark of the city, still running, but running from a different shape of loss. Again and again, the fire burned lower, and we leaned closer to see the embers. Tywin at Harrenhal, listening to reports by candlelight, never admitting aloud that Joffrey's cruelty unsettles him. Ned in his cell, understanding that survival is not a victory, only a different cost. Robb at his war table, tracing roads that may never lead to a red wedding because there is no dead father to avenge, only a captive one to recover. At the end, we stood at the wall, or what remained of it, and watched the darkness move. The wild, bright chaos of 5 kings had been rearranged into something more orderly, more calculated, and yet the cold still came. The watch still bled. The dead still walked. It is a different winter, not necessarily a kinder one. This is the heart of these journeys, not spectacle, but interior weather. The way a man like Ned swallows his shame for his daughter's sake. The way a girl like Sansa holds to a single stubborn thread of hope. The way a bastard's question, or an old man's strategy, can bend the line of history without ever quite breaking it. He does not swing the sword, he signs the paper. She does not win the battle, she survives the room. So we sit with the melancholy thought that there may be no better Westeros, only other arrangements of pain and duty and brief, fierce love. What if Robb had married a Frey and worn his crown to old age, heavy but unspattered by that feast? What if Stannis had won the Blackwater and brought his hard justice to a city already half in shadow? What if Catelyn had learned the truth about Jon years earlier, and something in Jon's chest moves when he hears his name spoken without the old edge of doubt? Each hinge offers a new corridor, a different Tywin, still writing his ravens with the particular care of a man placing something fragile on a table. A different Ned, perhaps standing on the wall and looking south, knowing the war he prevented and the war he could not. Tell me which door you would open next, which small choice you want to turn in your hands until its shape becomes clear. Because in life we are carried forward whether we understand the cost or not. But in stories, we can return to the Sept, to Harrenhal, to Winterfell's quiet rooms, and ask what if, and what if, and what if again, until the shadow of what was begins at last to make a different kind of sense.